Chapter 928, Secret is Out. Diana Winston was standing in the dimly lit room, her gaze fixed on the window. The room was adorned with elegant tapestries and furnishings, but all of it seemed insignificant in the face of the impending doom that was creeping closer. On the bed, Noah lay motionless, dressed in pristine white. Sabrina sat beside him, her eyes glued to his face as she brushed his hair back with a trembling hand. Suddenly, there was a deafening crash that echoed throughout the castle, followed by an eerie silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Diana's eyes narrowed as she stepped towards the window, drawing the heavy curtains aside to reveal the chaos outside. The sight that greeted her was a nightmare that come to life. Undead and vampires were swarming over the castle walls, fighting against the Nagaland soldiers and guardians who were trying desperately to fend them off. And amidst it all, the Dark Queen herself was leading the charge, a vicious gleam in her eye as she cut down anyone who dared to stand in her way. Sabrina's voice trembled as she spoke up. "Mother, what's happening?" "They've broken through the barrier," Diana replied, her voice cold and devoid of fear. Sabrina was horrified as she rushed to the window to witness the terror unfolding outside. "We have to do something," she pleaded. Diana turned to face her daughter, her eyes flashing with anger. "What do you propose we do? Apologize for Norvin killing her beloved dragon?" Sabrina winced at the bitterness in her mother's tone. "Maybe if I talk to her, I can dash," Diana cut her off with a sharp shake of her head. "You think she'll listen to reason? All they ever did was save us, time and time again. And what did we do in return? We killed one of them." Her words hung heavily in the air, and Sabrina could sense the fear and regret that lay beneath the icy exterior her mother presented. Despite her tough demeanor, Diana was worried about what would happen if the Dark Lord arrived. As if on cue, a flash of lightning illuminated the sky, and the ground shook beneath their feet. The undead were getting closer by the second, and there was nothing they could do to stop them. Sabrina felt helpless, and she knew that her mother felt the same. Diana was fed up with the constant manipulation of Noah by the Sky Hall, Andreas, and the Guardians. Even though Norvin had sworn that he killed Nightmare, Diana had a nagging feeling that there was more to the story than he let on. Despite her outwardly cold and angry demeanor toward Sabrina, Diana was secretly terrified. She couldn't shake off the fear of what would happen when the Dark Lord, the son that no one knew she had, finally arrived. Diana's eyes flickered with determination as she surveyed the chaos unfolding outside. "We can't stay here for long," she said firmly, her voice laced with urgency. Sabrina's face lit up with hope. "If we could get to the rooftop, we can reach Rowena's floating palace and teleport to the Sky Hall," she suggested. At the mention of the Sky Hall, Diana's eyes blazed with anger. The Sky Hall had been the root of all their troubles, causing endless strife and conflict within their family. Noah and Ghost had been at each other's throats, unaware that they were brothers, all because of the machinations of the Sky Hall. Diana's fists clenched at the thought, and a fierce determination burned within her. She wouldn't let the Sky Hall control their lives any longer. Diana's heart sank as she looked out at the horde of undead and vampires surging toward the castle. She knew that their only hope of escape was to reach the rooftop and teleport to the safety of Rowena's floating palace. But the thought of bringing Noah to the steps of the Sky Hall, the place where so much pain and manipulation had originated, filled her with a sense of dread. Eggless novel com. She glanced out the window once more, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the approaching army. She knew that she had one more card to play, but she was hesitant to reveal her true identity as Harriet Hunt. As much as she wanted to protect her family from the Sky Hall, she also knew that they needed all the help they could get. But if she revealed herself, everything would change. The world as they knew it would be turned upside down. Diana clenched her fists, feeling torn between her duty to protect her family and her desire to keep her true identity a secret. But she knew that time was running out, and they had to act fast if they wanted to survive the coming battle. As much as Diana hated bringing Noah to the steps of Sky Hall, she knew she had no other choice. Deep inside, Diana felt that all the efforts she had put into protecting her family and keeping them away from the Sky Hall were starting to crumble. The thought of her sons fighting against each other filled her with dread, and she would rather die than watch them kill each other. But right now, her priority was to save her beloved son Noah. However, as she looked at the overwhelming number of undead and vampires swarming towards the castle, she knew that reaching the rooftop without a fight was impossible. Sabrina was a skilled fighter, but the sheer number of enemies would be too much for her to handle. With no other options left, Diana knew she had to reveal her true identity as Harriet Hunt. Despite her desire to keep her past hidden from her family, she realized that her son's safety was the top priority. Sabrina, who had always been fascinated with Harriet Hunt's story, would surely recognize her mother. After all, Sabrina had read every book and note on Harriet Hunt that she could find. But Diana feared that Sabrina would be devastated to learn that her mother had lived a lie for decades, pretending to be someone else. It was a risk she had to take, but Diana couldn't help feeling apprehensive about the consequences of her revelation. Sabrina's heart was racing with fear as she watched the undead horde rushing towards the castle. She knew she had to protect her brother and mother at all costs. As she looked at her mother, she saw the determination on her face, and it gave her some hope. But she could see the fear in her mother's eyes, which made Sabrina feel even more anxious. Sabrina had always seen her mother as a gentle and fragile woman who had never experienced violence or harm. She had been sheltered from the outside world and had always relied on her family to keep her safe. But now, with the undead and vampires closing in, Sabrina knew that it was her duty to protect her family and keep them safe. Although she knew that Diana was strong and capable, she couldn't imagine her delicate mother fighting against the undead and vampires. Sabrina felt a sense of duty to protect her brother and mother, to keep them safe from harm. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change and that their lives would never be the same again. With a determined look in her eyes, Sabrina stepped forward and flicked her wrist, summoning a long, silver sword into her hand. The blade gleamed in the dim light of the room, and Sabrina's grip on the hilt was firm and steady. "Mother, take Noah with you and stay close," she instructed, her voice strong and resolute. Sabrina's words had barely left her lips when a loud banging on the door interrupted them. Diana's heart skipped a beat as she realized that the undead had breached the castle walls and was now at their door. Ethan was away from the castle, which calmed Diana a bit, knowing that he was with the other Winstons and could protect her children if needed. But deep down, she knew that he would be desperate to return and fight by her side. A deafening thud echoed through the room as the door suddenly buckled under an unseen force, sending shivers down Sabrina's spine. The sound of clawing and growling grew louder by the second, causing Sabrina to stand in front of her mother, her grip tightening around the hilt of her sword. Diana felt her heart racing as her mind conjured images of the undead horde breaking through the door and spilling into the room like a raging flood. Then, the door finally cracked open, revealing the 5 undead that had managed to slip past the guards and make their way into the castle. These were not your average undead, as they were thin and quick, their movements resembling that of an animal more than a human. Their glowing red eyes locked onto Sabrina and Diana. Sabrina, however, was quick to react, her sword gleaming in the dim light of the room as she rushed toward the undead with fierce determination. The clash of metal against flesh filled the room as Sabrina expertly dispatched the undead with deadly precision, each swing of her sword sending sparks flying. Sabrina finally dispatched the 5 undead who rushed into the room, leaving blood and gore scattered around the space. The silence that followed Sabrina's victory over the undead was deafening. The only sounds that could be heard were the faint rustling of the wind outside and the soft panting of Sabrina as she regained her breath. The room was filled with the stench of blood and gore, and Sabrina's silver sword glinted in the dim light. Diana's eyes scanned the room, her senses heightened as she waited for the next wave of attack. She could feel the tension in the air, as if the silence was just a prelude to a much bigger threat. Suddenly, the shadows outside the room started to move. Diana, a seasoned warrior, knew this silence just symbolized a bigger threat. The shadows at the doorway started to take shape as a figure robed in black robes emerged. The figure's body was almost completely concealed by the long, dark cloak that flowed behind it, and the only visible features were the sharp, gleaming fangs poking out from under the blood-soaked fabric. The air around them seemed to grow colder as if the very presence of the figure was sapping the warmth from the room. Diana could sense that this was no ordinary vampire. The way it moved, with a slow and deliberate pace, made it clear that this was a creature of great power and malice. As the vampire made his way into the room, his presence alone sent chills down Sabrina's spine. His black robes flowed around him as he moved, and his fangs glistened in the dim light. Sabrina could feel his malice radiating off of him, making her feel as if she was in the presence of death itself. "I found Noah," the vampire crackled, his voice laced with bone-chilling malice. The way he said it made Sabrina's blood run cold. The vampire took slow, deliberate steps towards Sabrina and Diana, and Sabrina could see the delight in his eyes at finding them. But despite her fear, Sabrina stood firm, her sword tightly clenched in her hand. She knew she had to protect her mother and brother at all costs. "Jackpot," the vampire kept chuckling in a low, sinister voice. His chuckle sent shivers down Sabrina's spine. In his eyes, Sabrina was weak, a mere core-strengthening stage warrior, and Diana was even weaker, only at the body-refining stage. He usually wouldn't even bother to waste his time drinking her blood. However, this time was different. This weak and powerless woman was Noah's mother, and that made her valuable to the vampire. He hoped to capture them and offer them as a reward to the Dark Queen. Sabrina lunged at the vampire with her sword, but the vampire didn't take her seriously. He dodged with ease and taunted her, "Is this all the strength you have? I thought you were supposed to be protecting your family." His voice was laced with malice and amusement. He continued to dodge and weave around Sabrina's attacks, playing with her like a cat with a mouse. "You're no match for me, little girl. I'm a soul-refining stage vampire, and you're just a core-strengthening warrior. You're like a kitten trying to fight a lion," he said with a smirk. As Sabrina continued to fight, the vampire kept bragging about how he would be rewarded by the Dark Lord when he presented Noah to him. "When I bring Noah to the Dark Lord, he will be pleased and reward me handsomely. And he'll make sure he knows that I also caught his precious mother and sister," he said, his voice filled with pride. He continued to taunt them, "You should come with me instead of waiting for the Dark Queen. She'll kill you in her anger, but I can guarantee your safety." His voice was slick and persuasive, but Sabrina knew better than to trust him. The vampire, who had been toying with Sabrina, suddenly decided he had had enough. He moved with lightning-fast speed and landed a powerful punch on Sabrina's jaw, sending her reeling backwards. Sabrina's sword clattered to the floor as she struggled to stay on her feet. The vampire smirked as he approached Sabrina, who was trying to get back up. "Don't worry, a little taste won't hurt," he taunted, baring his fangs. Sabrina gritted her teeth and lunged at him, but the vampire easily sidestepped her and punched her in the stomach. Sabrina gasped for air and fell to her knees, clutching her stomach. The vampire loomed over her, a sinister smile on his lips. "You're a feisty one," he said. "But it's time to put you out of your misery." He raised his hand to strike the final blow. But before he could do so, he suddenly felt a gush of wind and saw a blur of movement. A split second later, he felt a sharp pain in his neck and saw blood spurting out. He stumbled backward, trying to pull away, but it was too late. He felt his body go limp and he fell to the ground, dead. Sabrina couldn't believe her eyes as she looked up to see her mother standing before her with a sword in her hand. The blood on her face made it difficult to see clearly, but she knew it was her mother. How could she have defeated the powerful vampire who had knocked her out with just one strike? Sabrina's shock was palpable, and her mind was racing with questions. What just happened? How her feeble, weak mother killed the vampire? Sabrina could only stare in disbelief, waiting for her mother to explain what had just happened. The air was tense, and the silence was deafening as the two of them stood there in the aftermath of the battle. The future was uncertain, and Sabrina had no idea what was coming next. Chapter 929. Secret is out too. Sabrina was in a state of shock as she looked up to see her mother standing before her with a sword in her hand. Her mother's appearance was transformed as she stood there, her hair disheveled and her clothes covered in blood. The black blades of the sword glinted in the dim light, and the blood of the vampire trickled down the sword, staining it red. The headless body of the vampire twitched on the ground as Sabrina struggled to take in what had just happened. The room was filled with the metallic smell of blood, the stench of death and decay, and the sickly sweet odor of the vampire's flesh. Sabrina could hardly believe that her mother, the gentlewoman who had always been her rock, had just slain a powerful vampire with ease. The image of her mother, standing there like a warrior, her sword dripping with blood, was seared into Sabrina's mind. The shock of the moment left Sabrina trembling and unable to speak. She didn't know what to do or what to say. All she could do was stare at her mother, trying to reconcile the woman she knew with the fearless warrior who stood before her. As Sabrina looked at her mother holding the blood-stained sword, she couldn't help but feel a sense of shock and disbelief. Her mother, who she always thought of as gentle and sweet, seemed like a completely different person at that moment. It was almost as if she had been transformed into a fierce warrior, ready to do whatever it took to protect her family. But Sabrina couldn't forget the memories of her mother's gentleness, the moments when she tucked her into bed at night and read her bedtime stories. Or the times when they baked cookies together and laughed as they made a mess in the kitchen. She remembered the time when she was 7 and had a nightmare. Her mother stayed up with her all night, holding her until she fell asleep. And the time when she tried to fly on top of a sword and fell down, her mother stayed with her and cleaned her wounds while singing her favorite song. These memories flooded Sabrina's mind, making her feel like she was in a dream. She couldn't reconcile the sweet memories with the fierce warrior standing before her, holding a sword drenched in blood. It was like seeing two completely different sides of her mother. As Sabrina continued to stare in shock, the room smelled of blood, and the twitching of the vampire's headless body on the ground created an eerie atmosphere. But Sabrina's mind was too preoccupied with the image of her mother as a fierce warrior, the one who just saved her life, and the one who she could always trust to keep their family safe no matter what. Unbeknownst to Sabrina, Ethan had revealed Diana's true identity as Harriet Hunt to her almost a year ago when she had returned from the southern continent after being kidnapped by the vampires. But Samuel had erased those memories from her mind. And when Imelda had accidentally spilled the truth again, Samuel had wiped her memories once more. However, this time, Sabrina was left without Samuel to erase her memories again. When the room fell silent, Sabrina stared at her mother in shock. She had never seen this side of her before. The black sword in her hand seemed like an extension of her arm, dripping with the blood of the fallen vampire. The scent of death and decay lingered in the air, mixing with the metallic smell of blood. "Take your brother and stay close to me," Diana commanded Sabrina, but Sabrina was too stunned to follow her mother's orders. Before Sabrina could process what was happening, another group of undead and a vampire barged into the room. The mindless undead rushed into the room with no awareness of what had happened, but the vampire leading them was taken aback by the sight before him. The vampire's eyes widened in shock at the sight of his comrade's decapitated head. Sabrina tried to gather herself and reach for her sword but was too slow. In a split second, Diana lunged at the group, the black sword gleaming in the dim light of the room. The vampire and undead were caught off guard by Diana's sudden attack, but they quickly recovered and started to fight back. Sabrina watched in awe as her mother fought with the agility and strength of a seasoned warrior. But the odds were against her, and she was outnumbered. Sabrina tried to gather her wits and reach for her sword, but the shock and the sight of her mother in battle made her movements slow and clumsy. She saw her mother surrounded by the undead and the vampire, her black sword moving with blinding speed. Sabrina could hear the clash of swords and the growls of the undead, but it all seemed distant, like a dream. As Diana lunged forward with her black sword, she moved with such grace and precision that it seemed almost supernatural. Her movements were swift and deadly as she sliced through the undead with ease. Her blade glinted in the flickering light of the torches as she moved, leaving a trail of blood and gore in her wake. Eggless novel com. The vampire was caught off guard by Diana's sudden attack, and for a moment, he hesitated. But Diana showed no mercy, and she charged forward with a fierce determination. The vampire tried to dodge her attacks, but Diana was too quick for him. With a deft swing of her sword, she sliced through the vampire's neck, decapitating him in one swift motion. The vampire's headless body collapsed to the ground with a sickening thud, and blood gushed from the wound in a grotesque fountain. The undead, confused and disoriented by the sudden attack, stumbled about blindly, but Diana was relentless. She sliced through them with ease, each swing of her sword sending limbs and torsos flying through the air. As the last of the undead fell to the ground, Diana stood in the middle of the carnage, her black sword dripping with blood. Sabrina watched in shock, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had never seen her mother like this, and the sight was both terrifying and exhilarating. In that moment, Diana seemed like a different person altogether. Her eyes burned with a fierce intensity, and her face was twisted into a grimace of determination. She was like a force of nature, unstoppable and unyielding. For a moment, there was silence in the room, broken only by the sound of Sabrina's ragged breathing. Then, slowly, Diana turned to face her daughter. The black blade of her sword gleamed in the flickering light, and Sabrina couldn't help but feel a shiver run down her spine. "Get your brother," Diana's voice boomed through the room like a fierce storm that made Sabrina's bones shiver. It was a far cry from the gentle and soothing voice Sabrina was used to hearing. Without wasting any time, Sabrina rushed to Noah and cast a simple spell, causing an invisible hand to lift him into the air, close to her gently. "Mother," as they stepped outside the door, Sabrina tried to question Diana, but her mother was already charging forward, her sword gleaming under the dim light. Sabrina followed behind her, her mind racing with questions. What was happening? Why was her mother wielding a black sword? And who was she really? After exiting the room, Sabrina and Diana found themselves in a narrow hallway that smelled of damp stone and musty air. The hallway was dimly lit, and the walls were lined with torches, casting a flickering orange light. The floor was made of worn stone bricks that were uneven and slippery. The hallway led to a narrow staircase that wound its way up to the rooftop of the castle. As they walked, they could hear the sound of shuffling footsteps coming from the other end of the hallway. Sabrina could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she realized that the undead horde and vampires were on the other side of the hallway and walking toward them. But Diana stood between Sabrina and the undead with her sword in her hand, ready to fight. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Sabrina could hear the hiss of vampires as they approached. The flickering torches cast ominous shadows on the walls, making it difficult to see what was coming. Sabrina tried to calm herself down, but she couldn't help feeling a surge of fear as the footsteps grew closer. Diana's grip on her sword tightened as the undead and vampires approached. Sabrina could see the determination in her mother's eyes as she stood her ground. Despite the overwhelming odds, Diana remained calm and composed. The undead and vampires were almost upon them now, their moans and hisses growing louder with each passing moment. Sabrina's heart was pounding in her chest as she trailed behind her mother, her mind racing with questions about Diana's true identity. But before she could even voice them, Diana turned to her with a steely gaze and issued a chilling command. "Stay behind me, and don't try to be a hero," she said in a cold, commanding tone. The horde of undead and vampires rushed toward them, their growls echoing through the narrow hallway. Sabrina could feel the ground shaking beneath her feet as they drew closer. To her shock, her mother's hair color began to change before her eyes, transforming from golden to raven black. Her gentle mother was no longer recognizable as she stood tall and fierce, her white robes now replaced with black armor. A long black coat draped over her armor, making her appear even more intimidating. Sabrina couldn't believe her eyes as she watched her mother transform into a warrior right before her very eyes. Sabrina couldn't believe her eyes. Her mother, who she had always known as a gentle and nurturing figure, now stood before her in a black armor and raven black hair, resembling the famous Harriet Hunt. It was a shock that left Sabrina stunned and unable to comprehend what was happening. Despite the striking resemblance to the legendary Harriet Hunt, Sabrina couldn't bring herself to believe that her mother was Harriet Hunt. The shock of seeing her mother in such a different light was overwhelming, and Sabrina could feel her thoughts swirling in confusion. As Harriet dashed towards the horde of undead and vampires, her swords glinted in the dim light of the hallway. The undead and vampires rushed at her, snarling and hissing, their teeth and claws bared. Harriet met them head-on, swinging her sword with deadly precision, cutting down the undead and vampires one by one. The smell of blood filled the air as she waded through the horde, her black armor and long black coat swishing behind her. The fight continued as Sabrina watched in awe as her mother fought with unmatched skill and agility. Suddenly, another black sword appeared in Harriet's hand, and Sabrina realized her mother was dual-wielding her swords. The clash of steel against steel echoed through the hallway as Harriet parried the attacks of the undead and vampires, striking back with deadly accuracy. Blood spattered the walls and floor as Harriet's sword sliced through flesh and bone. The undead and vampires were relentless, but Harriet was a force to be reckoned with. Sabrina could see the resemblance between her mother and Harriet Hunt, the famous vampire hunter, and it shocked her to the core. She couldn't believe that her own mother had such a dark and dangerous past. Despite the overwhelming odds, Harriet fought on, her swords a blur of motion as she cut through the horde of undead and vampires. Sabrina watched in horror as her mother took hit after hit, but Harriet never faltered. She fought with a determination and ferocity that Sabrina had never seen before, and it filled her with both awe and fear. As Diana fought the horde of vampires and undead, she took several hits from their sharp claws and teeth. Blood trickled down her face, and her armor was covered in gore, but she refused to back off. Her sword flashed through the air as she took down vampire after vampire, her movements fluid and precise. Despite the brutal hits she took, Diana kept fighting with all her strength. The vampires were fast and agile, but she was even faster. She dodged their attacks with ease and countered with deadly precision, slashing through their flesh and severing limbs. The undead were slower, but their sheer numbers were overwhelming. Diana fought them off with her swords, striking them down one by one. But as the fight continued, Diana began to tire. Her movements slowed, and she started to take more hits. Despite the pain, she refused to give up. She fought on, her swords dancing in the air as she battled the horde with everything she had. Diana felt the pain of every hit from the vampires and the undead. But instead of retreating, she roared like a lioness and fought back even harder. Her black swords glimmered in the dimly lit hallway as she struck the undead and vampires with deadly precision. She kept fighting, her eyes burning with a fierce determination to protect her family. As more and more undead and vampires came at her, Diana's movements became more fluid, and her strikes more deadly. She moved like a whirlwind, her swords cutting through the air and slicing through the undead and vampires. Through the chaos of battle, Sabrina watched in awe as her mother fought with such ferocity and skill. Regardless of the odds stacked against her, Diana never gave up. She was a true warrior, a hero in the face of danger. Sabrina's heart leapt in her throat as she saw the vampire knock one of the swords from her mother's hand. "Mother, watch out!" Sabrina shouted, fear and urgency lacing her voice. But Diana was already one step ahead. With lightning-fast reflexes, she dodged the vampire's next attack, twirling her remaining sword in her hand. And then, to Sabrina's amazement, Diana raised her free hand and a blinding white flame burst forth from her fingertips. The flame was pure and bright, so bright that Sabrina had to shield her eyes from the intensity of the light. The flame shot forth like a laser beam, burning a hole through multiple undead and vampires in its path. Sabrina watched in awe as her mother wielded this incredible power, her raven-black hair whipping around her face as she fought on with renewed vigor. As the fight continued and Diana proved her incredible fighting skills, Sabrina's mind struggled to process the reality of the situation. Despite her attempts to convince herself that her mother was not Harriet Hunt, the evidence in front of her was overwhelming. The black swords, the black armor, the stunning combat skills, and the power of the white flames all pointed to one undeniable truth: her mother was indeed the legendary Harriet Hunt. Sabrina felt a mix of emotions, including shock, disbelief, and confusion. She had always known her mother as a gentle and caring woman, not a fierce warrior capable of taking on hordes of undead and vampires. It was difficult for Sabrina to reconcile the two images of her mother in her mind. As she watched her mother continue to fight, Sabrina's thoughts raced. What did this mean for their family? How had her mother been able to keep her true identity hidden for so long? And most importantly, what was going to happen next? Michael will appear in 2 chapters and it will be worth the wait. Chapter 9:30 The Dark Lord's Wrath. Harriet was a force to be reckoned with. Sabrina watched in awe as her mother slaughtered wave after wave of undead and vampires. She could see the fatigue in Harriet's movements, but it didn't stop her from taking down any enemy that dared to get close. Sabrina could feel the terror in her heart as she saw the number of undead and vampires that had amassed outside the castle. She knew that they were outnumbered and outmatched, but her mother's strength gave her hope. As the battle continued, Sabrina saw Harriet take hit after hit, but she kept fighting. Blood dripped from cuts and bruises on her body, but she refused to back down. Sabrina watched as her mother fought with fierce determination, her eyes blazing with a fire that seemed to come from deep within her soul. It was clear that she was fighting for her family, for her children, and for the safety of her loved ones. Sabrina's heart swelled with pride and admiration for her mother, but at the same time, she felt a deep sense of fear. She didn't want to lose her mother to this battle, but she knew that the only way to survive was to keep fighting. Diana wielded her black swords with the precision of a seasoned warrior and used the white flames to aid her in the battle. The flames illuminated the hallway with a blinding light as they burned through the flesh of the undead and vampires. The stench of burnt flesh and blood filled the air as Harriet cut through the horde of monsters with ease. The hallway was now a gory mess with body parts and blood splattered everywhere. Sabrina walked behind Harriet in shock, trying her best not to step on any of the corpses. She was afraid of the power and brutality of her mother. Sabrina never imagined that her gentle mother could fight with such ferocity. Harriet was still taking hits from the vampires and undead, but she never faltered. She moved like a whirlwind, spinning and cutting her way through the horde of monsters. The vampires and undead kept coming, but Harriet didn't back down. The battle raged on, and it seemed like it would never end. But with every swing of her swords and every blast of her white flames, Harriet was getting closer and closer to the rooftop where they could escape. As they reached the stairs that led to the rooftop, Diana could see the shadows of vampires and undead climbing up the circular stairs from below. She quickly turned to Sabrina and Noah. "Sabrina, take Noah and walk in front of me. Climb the stairs to the rooftop. I will take care of them from behind," Diana ordered in a commanding voice. Sabrina hesitated for a moment, looking at her mother's battered and bloodied state. But Diana gave her a reassuring nod, and Sabrina gathered her wits and took Noah's hand. As they started climbing the stairs, Sabrina could hear the screeching and growling of the undead behind them. She could feel her heart racing as she climbed higher and higher with Noah floating before her. The stairs were narrow and winding, making it difficult for them to climb quickly. But Sabrina could see the rooftop getting closer with each step they took. As they climbed the stairs, the vampires and undead climbed up from below. Diana had to fight while climbing the stairs and using the environment to her advantage. She kicked an undead down the stairs, causing a chain reaction that took out a few more. She spun around and sliced a vampire's head off, causing blood to splatter on the walls. Sabrina walked fast, keeping her brother close and casting spells to weaken the undead. But Diana was the one doing most of the fighting. She used her sword to parry blows and struck back with deadly precision. The stairs became slick with blood and gore as the bodies piled up. One vampire managed to grab Diana's leg, but she kicked him off and then smashed his head with the hilt of her sword. Sabrina felt fear creeping up her spine, but she knew she had to keep moving. She climbed up the stairs as fast as she could while Diana fought off the attackers. The vampires and undead climbed up the stairs as they taunted Diana with their hissing voices. "You think you can escape us, bitch," a vampire sneered as he lunged at her. But Diana was quick and agile, dodging his attack and striking him down with her sword. She didn't respond to the vampire's words, knowing that words wouldn't save her or her family. Another vampire tried to grab her from behind, but Diana spun around and sliced his head off with a swift stroke of her sword. However, she didn't escape unscathed. One of the undead managed to land a blow on her shoulder, causing her to grit her teeth in pain. But she didn't let it stop her from fighting, using the environment to her advantage by kicking a nearby stone down the stairs, causing the undead to trip and fall. As they climbed higher and higher, the battle became more intense, and the vampires became more desperate to stop Diana. But she fought on, striking down any who came close to her, even as more wounds appeared on her body. "You can't run," another vampire snarled. But Diana just glared at him with fierce determination in her eyes. "Come and get me," she replied as she delivered the final blow that sent the vampire tumbling down the stairs. The vampires couldn't believe their eyes as they saw Diana, a seemingly fragile and weak human, taking down their brethren with ease. They exchanged glances of confusion and disbelief. "Is she really human?" one vampire asked another. "She can't be," another replied. "No human could fight like that." Diana heard their whispers and couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She knew that her true identity as Harriet Hunt was still a secret, and the vampires had no idea what they were up against. She continued fighting with determination and strength, taking hits and inflicting wounds upon the undead and vampires. Despite the pain and exhaustion, she refused to give up, knowing that the safety of her family depended on her. With each swing of her sword, she proved to the vampires that she was not to be underestimated. And with each vampire she took down, she drew closer to the rooftop and the safety it offered. When they reached the rooftop, Sabrina was awestruck by the view of the ongoing war. She saw the undead and vampires on one side, fighting against the Guardians and Nagaland soldiers on the other. There were no dragons in sight, but the battle was intense nonetheless. On the ground, Guardians and Nagaland soldiers fought bravely against the overwhelming horde of undead and vampires, with swords and spells, trying to hold their ground. The sky was filled with smoke and the smell of burning flesh. Sabrina could hear the sound of clashing swords and the screams of the dying. Her heart raced as she watched the battle from above, feeling helpless and scared. Sabrina's heart lifted as she saw the flying palace hovering above them. She could barely contain her relief as she pointed up at the massive structure, shouting to Diana. "Mother, there's the palace," she cried out, her voice filled with hope. Diana looked up and saw the palace as well. A look of relief washed over her face as she realized that they were almost safe for a moment. The sky was a chaotic dance of ice and fire as Rowena and Azazel continued their battle. Their spells clashed with thunderous booms, sending shockwaves through the air and rattling the ground below. Despite the danger, Azazel's maniacal laughter echoed across the sky, a testament to his insane thirst for power. Diana's heart raced as she watched the battle unfold. She wanted nothing more than to join in and help her daughter, but she knew that Noah's safety had to come first. The stakes were too high, and she couldn't afford to lose focus. As she turned to Sabrina, she could see the fear in her eyes. Sabrina's hands trembled, and she struggled to catch her breath. Diana knew that she had to remain calm and steady, even in the face of such chaos. She put a reassuring hand on Sabrina's shoulder and whispered, "Stay close to me. We'll get through this." But even as she spoke, her attention remained fixed on the battle raging above. The sky was filled with crackling energy and dazzling displays of light, and Diana could feel the raw power emanating from Rowena and Azazel. It was a deadly dance, and Diana knew that only one would emerge victorious. As the battle continued, Diana's anxiety grew. She couldn't bear the thought of losing her daughter, not after everything they had been through. Her heart clenched with each blast of energy and every spell that echoed through the sky. Rowena had been fighting Azazel for what felt like an eternity, the sky above them exploding with magic and chaos. She had summoned all her strength and knowledge to counter Azazel's spells, her icy blades whistling through the air as she danced around him. Finally, with a deadly punch, Rowena sent Azazel flying backward and she flew back to the castle, landing on the rooftop. But when she saw the blood-drenched sight of her mother, Rowena's heart skipped a beat. Despite her cold personality and character, Diana, as a mother, could see the worry in Rowena's eyes. Trembling with concern, Rowena approached Diana, her mind filled with questions. She wanted to know if her mother was all right, if she had been hurt in the battle. The sight of her mother, covered in blood, filled her with a sense of dread and unease. Diana, sensing her daughter's worry and confusion, pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her close. For a moment, they just stood there, locked in a silent embrace, the chaos of the battle still raging around them. Finally, Diana pulled back, looking at Rowena with a solemn expression. "I am fine, my dear," she said, her voice steady and reassuring. "But we need to focus on the task at hand. We need to ensure Noah's safety and get through this." Rowena nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She knew her mother was right. They couldn't afford to let their emotions cloud their judgment, not when the fate of Noah was at stake. Together, they turned to face the chaos below, ready to do whatever it takes to protect Noah. As Rowena led Diana, Sabrina, and Noah toward her flying palace, the sky above them crackled with energy. Suddenly, a deafening boom echoed through the air, and a blinding light filled the sky. When the light faded, a group of soldiers descended from the heavens, their armor glinting in the sunlight. They wore silver plate armor and had blue feathery metal wings attached to their backs. Lightning flashed around them, and the ground shook as they landed on the rooftop. Rowena tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for her blades. But the soldiers made no move to attack. Instead, they stood in formation, their eyes fixed on Rowena and her group. Diana's eyes flared up in anger as she saw the angels of Sky Hall unit descend from the sky. Her heart felt like it was about to burst with a powerful emotion that she couldn't quite put into words. Their mere presence made her blood boil with a fierce intensity. The sight of the angels of Sky Hall unit triggered a deep-seated anger within Diana, one that had been smoldering for over 25 years. She had once led a unit of angels and trained them, only for them to turn on her when she was at her most vulnerable, about to give birth to her children, Noah and Dean. The betrayal still burned like a fiery inferno within her, a constant reminder of the pain and suffering she had endured. As she gazed upon the angels before her, Diana's eyes blazed with a fiery intensity, the anger inside her threatening to boil over. It took all of her willpower to keep her rage in check, to prevent herself from lashing out at these new soldiers who had done her no harm. But the memories of the past were too fresh in her mind, the wounds too deep to ignore. She could feel the anger burning hotter and brighter with every passing moment, threatening to consume her completely. Diana knew that the angels before her were not the same ones who had betrayed her so many years ago, but the anger inside her was like a beast that could not be tamed. It clawed at her from within, demanding to be unleashed. Yet, somehow, she managed to keep a tight rein on her emotions, her iron will preventing her from acting on her impulses. It was a struggle, a battle that raged within her, but she refused to let her anger get the better of her. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Diana took a deep breath and managed to regain her composure. The anger inside her still burned, but it was a controlled burn now, one that she could manage. She knew that she had to keep her emotions in check if she wanted to protect her family. Rowena's heart raced as she watched the exchange between the angels and her mother. "Escort them to my palace," she ordered, trying to maintain a calm exterior despite her growing fear. "They are coming with us, holy maiden," the man in armor replied, his voice cold and unyielding. Rowena's frown deepened. "They are going to my palace." "It's an order," she repeated, her tone now icy. "We have our own orders, holy maiden." "Your mother and brother are coming with us to the Sky Hall," the angel said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Diana's eyes narrowed as she realized the implications of the angel's words. She had taken an oath never to use her light flames or wield a sword again, and now it seemed the Sky Hall had discovered her secret. Sabrina's heart pounded in her chest as the tension in the air thickened. "Rowena, please, we have to go," she pleaded. But Rowena's attention was fixed on the angels, her grip on her blade tightening. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the silence. The lead angel remained stoic, his armor gleaming in the moonlight. "We have our orders, holy maiden," he repeated. Diana stepped forward, her eyes narrowed with anger. "What orders? Who sent you?" The angel's gaze flickered to her for a moment before returning to Rowena. "We are to bring you and your family to the Sky Hall," he stated plainly. Rowena's eyes blazed with icy fury. "And if I refuse?" she challenged, her blade now pointed at the lead angel. Rho Alpha D Alpha N Nu E, CM. The air crackled with tension as the angel remained unmoved. "We have been given authority to use force if necessary," he warned. Sabrina's hand trembled as she clung to Noah's arm. She could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on them all. Diana's mind raced with thoughts and emotions as she stared at the impassive angels before her. The weight of the decision she had to make felt like a crushing burden on her heart. She hated the idea of being under the control of the Sky Hall again, but the safety of her family was at stake. Her hands trembled as she clasped them tightly, trying to hide her fear and anger. She knew that if she refused to go with the angels, the consequences would be dire. She could not risk the lives of her loved ones for her own pride and anger. Taking a deep breath, Diana made the difficult decision. She would go with the angels to the Sky Hall, no matter how much she despised it. She would do whatever it takes to keep her family safe, even if it meant giving up her own freedom. Rowena. Sabrina's voice quivered as she spoke up, trying to catch the attention of the two powerful women. At first, they ignored her, lost in their own thoughts and concerns. But when Sabrina called out once more, pointing towards the distant sky, their hearts began to race with fear. Despite the already dark storm clouds above, the sky Sabrina was indicating was completely black, as if it was swallowing up everything in its path. The darkness was slowly but surely moving towards them, causing a chill to run down their spines. Chapter 931 The Dark Lord's Wrath. The black cloud spread across the sky like a menacing blanket, blotting out the sun and casting the entire kingdom into darkness. The air grew thick and heavy, and the winds picked up, howling like a pack of wolves. The storm grew increasingly violent, lightning bolts streaking across the sky like jagged scars, and thunder shaking the very foundations of the castle. But the sudden darkness that enveloped the kingdom was different. It was not just the absence of light, but a palpable, suffocating darkness that seemed to smother everything in its path. Even the brightest lights flickered and dimmed, unable to penetrate the darkness. It felt like the end of the world had come, and the kingdom was about to be swallowed by the void. As the darkness descended upon the kingdom, the vampires could feel the energy of the Dark Lord within it. They became excited and elated, seeing it as a sign of his arrival. The darkness was a manifestation of his power, and it made them feel stronger, more alive. They could sense the fear and panic in the humans, but to them, it was a source of amusement. They laughed and cheered, eagerly awaiting the arrival of their master. The vampires were confident that with the Dark Lord by their side, they would be unstoppable. As the darkness enveloped the kingdom, a sudden shift in the air could be felt. It was as if the very atmosphere was charged with an eerie energy. The temperature dropped drastically, and the wind picked up, whistling through the trees and buildings. The sky was no longer just dark, it was now a deep, almost malevolent black. As the seconds ticked by, the feeling of unease grew stronger. The hair on the back of the neck stood up, and the silence was deafening. It was then that the ground began to tremble, and a distant rumble could be heard. The tremors increased in intensity, and the very foundations of the buildings shook. Suddenly, there was a flash of blinding light, and a deafening boom echoed across the land. The source of the light and sound was unclear, but it was as if the heavens themselves were being torn asunder. The air crackled with energy, and the darkness seemed to swirl and pulse, as if alive. The vampires felt a renewed sense of excitement and anticipation at the dramatic change in the atmosphere. They knew that something significant was happening, and the thought of the Dark Lord's arrival only made them feel stronger and more powerful. The anticipation and excitement among the vampire community were palpable as they eagerly awaited what was to come. The Dark Queen and Azazel floated up into the sky, their forms silhouetted against the darkness that had enveloped the kingdom. They hovered there, suspended in the air, their eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the darkness seemed to be coming from. As they waited, the wind picked up, blowing their hair and clothes wildly around them. The clouds churned above them, lightning flashing and thunder rumbling ominously. The air was thick with the scent of magic, dark and powerful. Gaia and Michael shared a deep affection for their loyal dragon, Nightmare. Gaia was in Nagaland on a mission to avenge Nightmare's death by killing Norvin, who she believed was responsible. However, despite her fearsome reputation, the thought of facing Michael's wrath over Nightmare's death stirred unfamiliar emotions in her heart. Gaia knew that Michael's love for Nightmare was as deep as hers, if not deeper. She tried to push aside her worries and focus on the task at hand, but the uncertainty gnawed at her, making her feel vulnerable and exposed. Diana felt like her heart was being torn apart as she watched the impending doom that was about to befall her family. She knew that the Dark Lord was her son, and the fact that he was coming to kill his own twin brother, Noah, was unbearable. She felt a mix of fear, guilt, and sorrow all at once. As a mother, Diana had always wanted the best for her children, but she never imagined that they would end up as enemies, fighting against each other in a battle of good versus evil. She wanted to reach out to her son and tell him the truth, but she knew that it was too late. The Dark Lord was already on his way, and there was nothing she could do to stop him. Diana felt helpless and torn between her loyalty to her family and her obligation to keep the truth from her children. She knew that she had to face the Dark Lord and stop him from killing his family. But at the same time, she couldn't bear the thought of fighting against her own flesh and blood. It was a heart-wrenching situation that left her feeling conflicted and emotionally drained. The reporters and cultivators who were watching the darkness from a distance huddled together, shivering with fear. "Did you feel that?" one of the reporters asked as a gust of wind blew through the area, making them all shiver even more. "It's the Dark Lord. He's coming," another replied, his voice trembling. "We have to get out of here," another cultivator said, "before he arrives and kills us all." The cultivators were equally afraid. "We need to leave this place. The Dark Lord's power is too great," one of them said. "Remember what happened to the Thusian army? The Dark Lord slaughtered them all," another added. "We have to get out of here," another cultivator said, "before he arrives and kills us all." The group quickly dispersed, running in different directions, hoping to find a safe place to hide until the Dark Lord's arrival was over. The Guardians and Nagaland soldiers stood at the ready, their weapons gripped tightly in their hands as they waited for the arrival of the Dark Lord. The Guardians' faces were etched with fear and despair as they remembered the last time they faced him. They knew the power that he possessed and the destruction he could cause. "I wish Noah was here with us," one Guardian said, his voice trembling. "He is the only one who can defeat the Dark Lord." "But he is still in a coma," another replied. "We have to do what we can with what we have." The Nagaland soldiers, who had only heard of the Dark Lord's power, looked even more frightened. They huddled together, their eyes darting nervously around as they waited for the inevitable. "I never thought I'd see the day when the Dark Lord would come to Nagaland," one soldier muttered. "I heard he slaughtered an entire army of Thusians by himself." "He's like a demon," another soldier said, his voice shaking. "I don't know how we can fight him." The Guardians tried to hide their own fear, but it was clear that they were also struggling to keep their composure. They knew that their duty was to protect the kingdom, but they also knew that they were facing a nearly impossible task. As Rowena watched the storm grow darker and more violent, she knew that her family needed to be escorted to safety as soon as possible. She turned to the angels who had brought her mother and siblings and commanded them to leave and take her family to a safe location. "You need to get out of here now and take my family with you," Rowena said firmly. The lead angel, who had been so cold and unyielding before, suddenly seemed to grow more arrogant. "We do not take orders from you, Holy Maiden. We have been recently appointed as angels, and we answer only to the Sky Hall, Rho Alpha D Alpha, and Nu EC 0M." Rowena was taken aback by the angel's arrogance, but she remained determined. "I don't care who you answer to. My family needs to be protected, and I won't allow them to be caught in the crossfire of the Dark Lord's arrival. You will take them to safety." As the minutes ticked by, the sky above Nagaland grew even darker, as if the blackness had a life of its own and was spreading like a plague. The clouds roiled and churned, flashing with lightning bolts so bright they seemed to split the very air in two. Thunder boomed like the sound of 1,000 cannons, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The wind howled like a pack of wolves, whipping up debris and scattering it through the streets. It was as if the elements themselves were rising up in rebellion against the impending arrival of the Dark Lord. The darkness crept closer as Rowena's floating palace suddenly came to life, unleashing a barrage of fiery energy balls that pulsed with immense power. The Guardians stood in awe as they watched the energy surge through the air, destroying buildings and sending debris flying in all directions. "What in the name of light is happening?" one Guardian exclaimed, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "I don't know, but we have to do something." Another shouted, his eyes fixed on the raging battle in the sky. Each ball of fire was powerful enough to shatter the ground beneath it, and the energy pulsated from the fireballs as they flew toward the darkness. The energy balls continued to surge through the air, each one more powerful than the last. The Guardians could feel the ground beneath them shaking as the energy pulsating through the air, and they knew that they were witnessing a battle unlike any other. As the Guardians watched in awe, a glimmer of hope stirred in their hearts. The mighty palace was unleashing an onslaught of powerful fireballs against the darkness, and they couldn't help but feel a sense of relief at the display of sheer strength. "Maybe we can defeat this darkness after all," one of them muttered, his eyes never leaving the fiery projectiles. Despite the immense power and destruction of the fiery energy balls, the darkness seemed to absorb them effortlessly. As each ball of fire disappeared into the void, the Guardians' hopes began to fade away. They watched in horror as the darkness continued to creep closer and closer, undeterred by Rowena's palace. "No. It's not working," one Guardian murmured, his voice filled with disbelief and dread. "It's too powerful, we're not going to stop it," another said, his voice heavy with resignation. The Guardians felt a sense of hopelessness wash over them as they realized that there was little they could do to stop the impending doom. They watched as the darkness consumed everything in its path, leaving only destruction and chaos in its wake. The storm raged on, the thunder and lightning adding to the chaos and destruction. The Guardians knew that they were witnessing a battle for the ages, one that would determine the fate of their world. Suddenly a pulse of sound erupted from the darkness, even louder than the deafening thunder that had been raging around them. And then, as if in response, a wave of pure blackness shot forth from the heart of the darkness. It seemed to change the very air around them, turning the cold storm into an intense heat that burned their skin. As the wave of darkness approached, they could see that it was not just a wave of energy, but a mass of dark flames that moved like a crescent blade through the air. It felt as though the flames were alive, with a mind of their own. The Guardians and soldiers watched in horror as the wave of darkness consumed the fireballs fired by the floating palace, turning them to ash. And then, with a sound like the hissing of 1,000 serpents, the dark flames washed over the palace itself, melting the mighty structure of cold frost energy into nothingness before their very eyes. The shock of the sudden attack left them all reeling, stunned by the sheer power of the dark flames. For a moment, they could only stand and stare in horror at the empty space where the palace had once stood. But then, slowly, the realization set in that they were in grave danger. The Dark Lord had arrived and made his statement. The sudden destruction of the floating palace left everyone in shock and disbelief. The Guardians stood frozen, unable to comprehend the power that had just been unleashed. The rogue cultivators and reporters on the ground were equally stunned, their jaws dropping in horror. What just happened?" one rogue cultivator stuttered, his eyes wide with fear. That was the Holy Maiden's palace," another exclaimed, pointing up at the now destroyed structure. "I can't believe what I'm seeing," a reporter whispered, his voice trembling. "This is unreal." The power of the dark flames had left them all speechless, unable to process the destruction before them. The Guardians knew that they had to act fast before the darkness reached them, but the shock of seeing the palace destroyed had momentarily paralyzed them. "We have to move," one Guardian shouted, breaking the silence. "The darkness is almost upon us." The group quickly gathered their senses and began to move, running towards the safety of Nagaland's walls. The sound of thunder grew louder as they ran, and the darkness crept closer with each passing second. They knew that they were in for a fight, but they were determined to protect their kingdom at any cost. As everyone's attention was on the destruction of the floating palace, the ground beneath them began to shake violently. Suddenly, one of the Nagaland soldiers let out a deafening scream as his body began to convulse uncontrollably. In the next moment, his body exploded into a mist of blood, bones and flesh. The shockwave from the explosion sent the nearby soldiers flying in all directions, their bodies torn apart by the blast. The Guardians were horrified as they watched their fellow soldiers burst into bloody mist before their eyes. They could hear the screams and cries of their comrades as they too were consumed by the mysterious force. The ground shook with every explosion, sending shockwaves through the air that knocked the Guardians off their feet. Blood and gore filled the air, as the mist of the soldiers' remains covered the ground like a thick red fog. The Guardians frantically tried to protect themselves from the explosions, but it was no use. As the darkness approached them, the soldiers and guardians continued to burst into a completely red mist. Chapter 932, The Secret That Could Tear Them Apart. As the red mist cleared, the battlefield was a gruesome sight to behold. The ground was stained red with blood, and body parts were scattered everywhere. The air was filled with the stench of death and burning flesh. The surviving guardians and soldiers were in a state of shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. They looked around, trying to make sense of the carnage that had taken place. The storm continued to rage on, and the darkness that had enveloped the battlefield made it almost impossible to see. The only light came from the occasional flashes of lightning that illuminated the sky, revealing glimpses of the destruction and chaos that surrounded them. The wind howled through the ruins of buildings and the debris that littered the ground, making it difficult to hear anything but the roar of the storm. It was a disorienting and terrifying experience with no end in sight. The darkness seemed to press in on them from all sides, making it hard to breathe and adding to the overwhelming sense of fear and dread. The once bustling city was now a desolate wasteland. The buildings were destroyed, and the streets were empty except for the piles of rubble and debris. The storm still raged on, but the thunder was muffled as if it was mourning the loss of the fallen soldiers. The sky was still pitch black, and the darkness seemed to have consumed everything. The guardians and soldiers looked at each other, their faces a mix of horror and disbelief. They knew they had just witnessed something beyond their understanding, something they would never forget for the rest of their lives. As everyone's eyes were fixed on the pitch-black sky, the black clouds loomed closer and closer. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness and slowly descended toward them. The flashes of lightning illuminated his figure, revealing the ominous presence of the Dark Lord. His form was engulfed in a shroud of darkness. The billowing black coat he wore whipped around him in the violent wind, and the two swords on his back were fashioned in the shape of a menacing X. The Dark Lord's eyes glowed with a devilish light, a menacing blend of red and black that sent shivers down the spines of those who dared to look directly into them. His arrival stunned everyone into silence, and as they sensed his cultivation level, their hearts began to race with fear. He was at the half-celestial level, and the power that radiated from him was suffocating. The darkness that enveloped him seemed to spread and expand, leaving the battlefield in even deeper darkness. The guardians and Nagaland soldiers could feel the weight of his presence, and the atmosphere around them became heavy and tense. The storm that had been raging seemed to quieten down in comparison to the arrival of the Dark Lord. His presence was overwhelming, and it was as if he was challenging anyone to dare to oppose him. As the Dark Lord descended, the very air around him seemed to change. Even the vampires and the undead fell to their knees in fear, paying their respects to his overwhelming power. His gaze was fixed solely on the castle's rooftop, and he floated towards it with menacing grace. The angels surrounding the group felt the pressure building around them, suffocating them with his dark aura. "We are not prepared for this battle," the leader of the angels muttered. His voice was devoid of any emotion. He quickly retrieved a golden scroll from his space ring, attempting to teleport away to safety. But before he could even activate the spell, an invisible force snatched the scroll from his grasp, rendering him helpless. While Rowena watched the Dark Lord approach, she felt his power radiating off him like an all-consuming force. She couldn't even bring herself to move, as though she was frozen in place by the weight of his aura. Despite her own power, she knew that she was weak before him. But even as fear and awe took hold of her, she was filled with a fierce determination to protect her family. When the angels attempted to retreat, a shroud of darkness descended upon each of them, wrapping around their bodies like a twisted embrace. They were pulled towards the Dark Lord. His eyes fixed on them without uttering a single word. Each of the angels struggled and screamed as the darkness ripped them apart, their bodies torn into pieces. Blood splattered everywhere as their cries echoed across the battlefield. Sabrina watched in horror as the Dark Lord showed no mercy, his power overwhelming even the strongest of angels. She trembled as the sound of bones snapping and flesh tearing filled the air, unable to look away from the gruesome scene before her. The darkness seemed to consume everything in its path, leaving nothing but destruction and death in its wake. Finally, the screams subsided, and the darkness dissipated, leaving behind nothing but the remains of the angels. Sabrina felt sick to her stomach, unable to comprehend the ruthless power of the Dark Lord. She knew they were all in grave danger and needed to find a way to survive the coming onslaught. The darkness consumed the angels' bodies and armor and disintegrated into nothingness as the dark flames engulfed them in midair. Not even a speck of ash was left behind as the intense heat of the flames radiated to the ground, filling the air with the smell of burning flesh. Witnessing the ruthless power of the Dark Lord, the Guardians and Nagaland soldiers could feel their stomachs churning at the gruesome sight before them. The onlookers stood in stunned silence as they watched the Dark Lord unleash his unparalleled power. The destruction of the Holy Maiden's floating palace, the bloody explosions of the Nagaland soldiers and guardians, and the disintegration of a group of half-immortals were all carried out with ruthless efficiency, without the utterance of a single word. Even the Dark Queen and Azazel, who had witnessed their fair share of bloodshed, felt a tinge of fear in their hearts as they watched the carnage unfold before them. Yet, the Dark Queen knew that this was the inevitable consequence of Norvin's killing of Nightmare, and the Dark Lord's wrath was merely a manifestation of that event. As the Dark Lord's gaze turned towards them, Diana felt a surge of fear run through her. Her heart raced as she realized that her son, Noah, was in a coma and unable to defend himself against the half-celestial's power. She knew that no one else there knew the truth of the Dark Lord's identity, and the thought of Noah being caught in the middle of this battle terrified her. The Dark Lord descended toward the rooftop where Supreme Guardian Noah was floating, with Rowena shielding her family and taking slow steps back. The atmosphere was tense as the remaining Guardians, in an act of loyalty towards their beloved Supreme Guardian, turned their cannons towards the Dark Lord. The sense of determination was palpable as they prepared to do everything in their power to keep the Dark Lord away from Noah. Suddenly, hundreds of cannons fired at the same time, sending cannonballs soaring through the sky toward the Dark Lord. However, the Dark Lord calmly raised his finger, and with a flick of his wrist, hundreds of black lightning bolts descended from the dark clouds, striking down the cannonballs midair. The lightning bolts continued to strike the airships, causing them to explode in a shower of sparks and debris. The sheer power and precision of the Dark Lord's attack left everyone stunned and shocked. When the Dark Lord turned his gaze toward Noah's family, his eyes glowed with a fierce intensity. The black and red hues emanating from his eyes made it clear that he was consumed with rage. Rowena, shielding her family with her body, spoke his name softly, Ghost. Her voice trembled with fear, the first time anyone had heard such uncertainty in her voice. It was understandable, given the overwhelming odds they were facing. The Dark Lord was furious, consumed by the loss of his beloved Nightmare. Rowena knew that she had to try and reason with him. "Don't do this," she pleaded, hoping that she could somehow appeal to his humanity. The Dark Lord remained silent, consumed by his rage and grief. Memories of the baby dragon perched on his shoulder, its tails coiled around his neck, flooded his mind. The wet licks the dragon had given him, the playful antics they had shared, and the bond they had formed came rushing back, intensifying his emotions. The death of Nightmare had triggered something inside him, a burning desire to avenge his fallen companion. As the memories consumed him, the Dark Lord's eyes flared up, glowing with a dangerous mix of black and red. He raised his hand, and the air around him crackled with dark energy. Rowena, sensing the danger, stepped forward and called out to him, using his name. But the Dark Lord was not in the mood for talking or listening to pleas. The thought of slaughtering every single guardian and everyone Noah held dear consumed him, fueling his anger and determination. Rowena bravely stepped forward, hoping to appeal to the Dark Lord's sense of reason as he let out a menacing growl that sent chills down everyone's spine. "Go away," he snarled in a voice filled with rage and malice, his words echoing through the darkened sky like thunder. His eyes burned with an otherworldly intensity, and the air around him crackled with dark energy. It was clear that he was not in the mood for mercy or compassion. Despite the overwhelming danger, Rowena stood her ground between the Dark Lord and Noah. She was not going to back down, especially when it came to protecting her family. As the Dark Lord continued to approach, Rowena summoned the cold flames, a primordial flame of icy blue that was known for its extreme cold. The air around them immediately dropped in temperature, and the flames crackled with a blue light that illuminated Rowena's determined expression. The cold flames were unlike any other flame in existence, as they were born from the very beginning of the universe. They were said to have the power to freeze anything they touched, even other flames. As Rowena summoned the flames, they erupted around her, swirling and dancing like a blizzard of ice and fire. Diana desperately tried to stop Rowena from fighting her own brother, the Dark Lord. But before she could intervene, Rowena charged at the Dark Lord, her hands ablaze with the icy blue primordial flames. With all her might, Rowena threw a punch at the Dark Lord, but he effortlessly caught her fist in his hand. The cold flames burned brighter, but they were no match for the Dark Lord's dark flames that appeared around his fist, coiling around the cold flames like a snake around its prey. The two flames struggled against each other, but soon the dark flames overwhelmed and devoured the cold flames, leaving Rowena stunned and defenseless. The dark flames around the Dark Lord's fist burned hotter and darker than anything Rowena had ever seen. It was a symbol of his immense power and control over the darkness. Diana watched in horror as her daughter was overpowered by her own son, unable to do anything to stop the impending doom that was about to befall them. The Dark Lord's eyes glinted with darkness as he pulled Rowena towards him, holding her by the neck. "Stop!" Diana's voice echoed through the air, but it was too late. The Dark Lord's fist collided with Rowena's stomach, shattering her armor into pieces. She was thrown backward with immense force, crashing through the rooftop and leaving a trail of debris in her wake. The impact was so great that the ground shook beneath them, and a shockwave rippled through the air. The Guardians and Nagaland soldiers watched in horror as Rowena's body slammed into the ground, unmoving. As Rowena crashed through the rooftop, Sabrina's heart sank with fear. She ran towards her sister, screaming her name as she knelt beside her. "Rowena!" Sabrina shouted, tears streaming down her face. Rowena coughed up blood as she struggled to sit up, but her body failed her. Sabrina sobbed in pain and despair as she saw her sister's condition. She knew how strong Rowena was, and seeing her like this was heartbreaking. She wept uncontrollably as she watched her sister slip away, feeling completely helpless in the face of the Dark Lord's power. Diana felt every fiber in her body ache with the urge to rush to Rowena's side, but she knew she couldn't leave Noah alone. She was the only thing standing between the Dark Lord and Noah. She gritted her teeth and remained where she was, her eyes locked on the Dark Lord's menacing figure. The sight of Rowena being sent flying through the air filled her with a sense of helplessness and despair. She had already lost one son and would not lose another one. Diana's heart shattered into a million pieces as she watched the Dark Lord, her own flesh and blood, stand before his twin brother with the intention to take his life. The pain of seeing her own son filled with such rage and hatred was unbearable. It was a pain that only a mother could understand. As Diana stood there, she couldn't help but feel helpless and lost. No one knew the truth that the Dark Lord and Noah were brothers, not even the brothers themselves. It was a secret that Diana had kept hidden for so long, a secret that was now tearing her apart. She was torn between her love for both of her sons, and the duty she had to protect Noah. Diana could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders as she stood between her two sons, one consumed by darkness and the other floating in a coma. She wished she could tell them the truth, wished she could tell them that they were brothers, but the timing was never right. And now, with the fate of both her sons hanging in the balance, Diana was left with nothing but the crushing pain of a mother torn apart by the love for her two sons. Diana felt torn between her duty as a mother to protect her children and the fear of the consequences that might come with revealing the truth. She knew that the only way to stop the Dark Lord and save Noah possibly was to reveal the truth. However, the thought of tearing apart the fabric of their world and the possible backlash from the other factions was overwhelming, especially the Sky Hall. Her heart felt heavy with the weight of her decision, and tears streamed down her face as she watched her two sons face off against each other. She knew that the truth would change everything, but it was the only way to end this violence and the Dark Lord's slaughter possibly. As a mother, it pained her to see her sons fight each other, but she also knew that they were both powerful beings who could not be stopped easily. She had to make a decision that would not only affect her family but the fate of their entire world. Diana's heart was torn between her love for her two sons. She couldn't bear the thought of them fighting each other, especially since they were unaware of their true relationship. She knew that revealing the truth would have severe consequences, but she couldn't let them fight to the death. Diana made up her mind that she would rather face the consequences and die than witness her sons killing each other. The pain in her heart was so great that she was willing to sacrifice herself to save her sons from this terrible fate. In that moment, she realized that her love for her sons was stronger than any fear or consequence. She was willing to risk everything to protect them, even if it meant sacrificing her own life. Dean, listen to me. You and Noah, you're brothers. You're both my sons, Diana said, her voice shaking with emotion. Chapter 933, Will Michael forgive his mother? As soon as Michael heard the words, his heart felt like it was being ripped apart. A surge of emotions flooded through him, emotions that he didn't even know existed within him. The world around him seemed to come to a stop as he tried to process the revelation. The anger that had been burning within him slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a torrent of other intense feelings. He stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to move or speak as he grappled with the new information. A deep sadness overtook him as he realized the years he had spent alone, longing for a family. The anger he had felt before dissipated and was replaced with a searing rage as he remembered the feeling of abandonment that he had harbored for so long. The knowledge that his own mother had left him only added fuel to the fire that had been burning inside him for so many years. He wanted to lash out and make her pay for what she had done, but a part of him also felt a sense of relief at finally understanding the source of the pain he had carried for so long. He stood there in silence for a moment, his eyes closed, as he tried to come to terms with the truth that had just been revealed to him. Finally, he opened his eyes and turned to face Diana, his expression a mixture of pain, anger, and longing. While Michael stood there like a statue, his mind was filled with memories of his childhood. He remembered being alone and abandoned as a child, with no one to care for him. He would spend hours sitting alone in the dark, longing for the love and affection of a mother. One particular memory stood out to him, a cold, winter night where he had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. He had been wandering the streets, shivering in the cold, when he stumbled upon a couple huddled together under a blanket. They looked at him with pity in their eyes and offered him a small piece of bread, which he gratefully accepted. But as he turned to walk away, he heard them whispering to each other about the danger of taking in a child like him. Michael felt a lump form in his throat as he remembered the hurt and rejection he felt at that moment. He had never forgotten that feeling, and it had driven him to become stronger and more powerful than anyone else. But despite his strength and his status as the world's #1 hitman, he could never shake off the longing for a mother's love and the sadness of being abandoned as a child. As Michael thought about his past and the revelation of Diana being his mother, his heart filled with anger. He couldn't help but think about all the times he felt abandoned and alone as a child. It was like a cruel joke to him that while he suffered as an orphan, Diana raised Noah with all the love and affection that he never received. He remembered a time when he was just a young orphan boy, cold and alone on the streets. He had begged for food and shelter, but no one had wanted to take him in. Meanwhile, Noah had grown up in the safety and comfort of their mother's home, never having to worry about where his next meal would come from or where he would sleep at night. The memory of that rainy night brought tears to his eyes, and he couldn't help but feel angry at Diana for abandoning him. The sadness and loneliness he felt as a child were now compounded by the realization that his own mother chose to raise his brother with all the love and care he deserved while Michael was left to fend for himself. Little did Michael know that 25 years ago, the Sky Hall elders had performed a forbidden ritual to alter Diana's memory and sever her motherly bond with Michael. They had warned her that one of her twin sons would bring destruction and chaos to the world, but even with this knowledge, Diana couldn't bring herself to abandon her own child. However, the elders had gone to extreme lengths to alter her memories, making her believe that she had abandoned Michael, just as Michael had believed for all these years. A cruel twist of fate left Michael feeling angry and betrayed, knowing that his mother had unknowingly abandoned him. Tears began to roll down both Diana's and Michael's eyes as they let the truth sink in. Diana felt a mix of guilt, regret, and sorrow for the pain and suffering that her son had to go through alone. On the other hand, Michael felt a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal at the revelation that his own mother had abandoned him. They both felt a deep sense of longing for the time that they lost and could never get back. Diana approached Michael with her hands trembling with emotion. Tears streamed down both of their faces as they faced the truth of their familial connection. The dark shroud around Michael began to fade, revealing a man who had been consumed by anger and pain for so long. From above, Gaia watched in stunned silence as she slowly descended to the rooftop. Her usual fierce expression was replaced with a look of shock as the truth of Michael's past was revealed. Gaia was in disbelief upon learning that Diana Winston was Michael's mother, making the supreme guardian and arch-nemesis, Noah, his twin brother. The revelation left her stunned, and for a moment, she set aside her desire to avenge Nightmare. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on everyone as they grappled with the enormity of the truth that had been revealed. Michael felt an unfamiliar sensation as his mother wiped away the tear from his face. It was the first time in his life that he felt the touch of his mother. His mind was in complete disarray, unable to process the fact that Diana had been his mother all along. He had always imagined that the day he finally discovered the truth, he would be able to maintain his composure and deal with it rationally. But the reality was far different from what he had anticipated. A tidal wave of emotions overwhelmed him, and he struggled to make sense of them. The anger and bitterness that had been simmering inside him for years threatened to boil over, but at the same time, he felt a deep longing for the love and care of a mother that he had never known. Michael wanted to scream and shout at Diana, to demand answers for why she had abandoned him. But his throat felt tight, and no words came out of his mouth. He felt like a lost child, unsure how to process the overwhelming emotions coursing through his body. The thundering storm and gusting wind seemed to have stopped as soon as Diana revealed to Michael that she was his mother. Everyone around them was stunned, and their eyes were wide with disbelief. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. Sabrina broke the silence and whispered in shock, "What? Noah and Michael are brothers?" The rest of the Guardians and Nagaland soldiers were equally stunned and looked at each other with disbelief. The idea of the Supreme Guardian and the arch-nemesis being twin brothers was beyond their comprehension. One of the Guardians whispered, "Did she just say that she is the Dark Lord's mother?" Another one responded, "And Noah's too. They are twin brothers." The realization hit them hard, and they could feel their hearts pounding in their chests. The fact that the Supreme Guardian and the Dark Lord were related by blood was something they couldn't have imagined in their wildest dreams. Diana's trembling voice rang out in the silence that enveloped them. The storm and the wind seemed to have come to a halt as she uttered the words that shook Michael to his core. Her hands shook as she gently cupped Michael's face, the tears rolling down her face as she looked into his eyes. "You are not Ghost," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "You are Dean Winston. That was the name I gave you when you were born," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael's eyes widened in shock as he heard the name. He had never heard it before, but it felt like a part of him had been awakened. Diana searched Michael's eyes for any sign of recognition or affection, but all she found was pain and anger. She longed to hear her son call her mother just once, but all she received was a barely audible response. "Say something," she pleaded, desperation seeping into her voice. She needed to know how he felt about the truth she had just revealed. Michael's eyes, usually so full of darkness, now held a mix of emotions that Diana couldn't decipher. His voice was strained and almost inaudible when he finally spoke. "I might be your son," he began, his voice shaking with emotion, "but you are not my mother." The words hit Diana like a punch to the gut. She felt as if the world had just crumbled beneath her feet. All she wanted was to embrace her son and make up for the lost time, but she knew deep down that it was impossible. Michael felt that there was no possible way he could forgive his mother for abandoning him and treating him like he was worthless. Although he understood that she may have had her reasons, the pain he went through was too great to forgive and forget simply. His entire life was filled with suffering and despair, and it was difficult to move past the hurt and betrayal he felt. Furthermore, Michael couldn't believe that he and Noah were brothers. They were completely different people in every way possible. Noah had grown up in a loving family, with everything he could ever want, while Michael had to fight for everything he had. The thought of being related to someone who had lived such an easy life was almost laughable. Despite the intense anger and betrayal he felt, a small part of Michael couldn't help but wonder what his life would have been like if things had been different. If he had grown up with his family, would things have been better? Would he have been able to live a normal life instead of one filled with pain and suffering? These questions lingered in his mind, but they didn't change the reality of his situation. He was still the Dark Lord, and he would still have to face his brother in battle. Michael's eyes shifted towards Noah, who was still unconscious in the air. Even now, you are standing before me, protecting Noah. I had no one to protect me, Michael said with a sad, bitter snicker. Sabrina's heart skipped a beat when she heard the revelation that Michael was her brother. It was as if all the pieces of a puzzle had suddenly fallen into place, and the bond she had always felt with Ghost now made perfect sense. She had always felt a strong connection to Ghost, the Dark Lord, and now she knew why. It was because they were siblings, and she had never even suspected it. As the reality of the situation sunk in, Sabrina's mind was flooded with memories of her interactions with Ghost. Every time they had fought, every time they had met, every conversation they had ever had suddenly took on a new meaning. She could not believe that the person she had been fighting against all this time was her own brother. Rowena, who had been punched by Michael, slowly rose back to her feet, her body trembling with shock. She could not believe what she had just heard. Her mother had another son, and he was the Dark Lord who had caused so much destruction and chaos. But as Rowena looked into Michael's eyes, she saw not the infamous Dark Lord but her little brother. Despite his terrifying reputation, she could not help but feel a strong connection to him. Michael's voice trembled with a mixture of anger and sadness as he spoke. I have my own family now, just as you have built yours. But Noah has taken someone precious from me, and he must pay for what he did. He wanted to fight the Dark Lord, didn't he? Well, he will get his chance, whether I am his brother or not, he said, his gaze fixed on Noah's unconscious body. Diana's heart sank at Michael's words. She knew she had to do something to make things right between her sons, but she didn't know where to start. Sabrina, who had been listening to their conversation, felt a knot form in her stomach. She couldn't believe that Ghost was her brother and the infamous Dark Lord at that. Rowena, on the other hand, saw no Dark Lord in front of her, only her little brother. She wanted to embrace him and tell him everything would be okay, but she knew it wouldn't be that simple. The pain and anger in Michael's voice were palpable, and she knew he wouldn't let go of his grudge against Noah easily. With a swift flick of his wrist, Michael pushed Diana aside and extended his hand toward Noah. The unconscious body of the Supreme Guardian slowly floated towards Michael, and before anyone could react, he grabbed Noah by his neck. The air crackled with tension as every onlooker held their breath, realizing that the fate of the world might rest on this moment. The Guardians, Nagaland soldiers, rogue cultivators, and news reporters watched in disbelief as the one person who could stop the Dark Lord's reign was now in his clutches, powerless and unconscious. Chapter 934, The Dark Lord versus the Supreme Guardian. As Michael held Noah by his neck, a mixture of emotions swirled inside him. He had always seen Noah as the Supreme Guardian whom he must defeat, but now he had learned that Noah was his own twin brother. The conflicting feelings made it difficult for him to hurt Noah, but the thought of Nightmare's little dragon and how he wasn't there to save Nightmare fueled Michael's anger. As he tightened his grip around Noah's neck, he wished that Noah was conscious and aware of what was happening. The memories of Nightmare's death and the pain it caused him gave him the strength to overlook any familial bonds he might have had with Noah. Diana's heart pounded in her chest as she saw Michael's grip tighten around Noah's neck. She knew that if she didn't act fast, the worst could happen. Tears streamed down her face as she pleaded with Michael to let Noah go. Please, Dean, let him go. He's your brother. Don't do this, she begged, her voice shaking with fear and emotion. But Michael remained resolute, his grip on Noah's neck showing no signs of loosening. The others present could only watch in stunned silence, unable to comprehend the gravity of the situation unfolding before them. Desperate to save her son, Diana stepped forward and put her hand on Michael's shoulder. Please, Dean, listen to me. You don't have to do this. We can find another way. Don't let your anger consume you, she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, it seemed like Michael might relent. His grip on Noah's neck loosened ever so slightly. But then his expression hardened, and he pushed Diana aside with a flick of his wrist. As the world's deadliest assassin, Michael knew that he could easily devise a plan to eliminate Noah. However, he was aware of the limitations of his abilities. Killing Noah without the God-killing arrows would only result in Noah's physical body being destroyed, while his soul would escape and search for a new physical host. This would make it nearly impossible for Michael to locate and kill Noah again. Furthermore, Michael was certain that Andreas, Noah's mentor, would use Noah's survival as an opportunity to train him in the shadows and make him even stronger. This would put Michael at a disadvantage and force him to watch his back constantly. The system also advised against killing Noah until he could be permanently killed using the God-killing arrows. Despite the overwhelming desire for revenge, Michael knew that he had to bide his time and wait for the right moment to strike. He couldn't risk letting Noah slip away and come back stronger, with even more people in his corner. For Michael, it was all about timing and strategy. However, Michael's anger boiled within him as he learned that Noah was present during Nightmare's death, and may have even been a witness to Norvin, Noah's pet monkey, killing Nightmare. Michael had saved Noah's father not too long ago, and if it weren't for him, both Diana and Sabrina would have perished. Yet, Noah repaid this debt by watching Nightmare die right before his very eyes. Michael found this betrayal to be unacceptable. What Michael did not know, however, was that Nightmare was killed by Andreas' second soul piece, which had possessed Noah and used his body to carry out the heinous act. This information was kept hidden from Michael, adding to his already growing anger towards Noah. Sabrina ran towards him, tears streaming down her face as she pleaded with her brother to release Noah. "Brother, please, don't do this. You can't be the monster they claim you are. You're not the Dark Lord. You're my brother." She continued to beg, her voice trembling with fear and desperation. "I know you're hurting, and I understand why you're angry, but please, don't hurt Noah. He's not responsible for what happened to Nightmare." Sabrina's words seemed to penetrate Michael's anger and confusion. He looked at her, his grip on Noah's neck loosening slightly. "You don't understand, Sabrina. You don't know what he did." Sabrina shook her head, her eyes full of sadness and understanding. "I don't need to know. I just know that he's our brother, and we should stick together, no matter what." Michael seemed to be fighting an internal battle, torn between his desire for revenge and his softer side. Diana's voice was shaking as she joined her daughter. "Please, Dean. I beg of you. He's your brother. Don't let revenge cloud your judgment." But Michael's grip around Noah's neck only tightened, and he did not budge. At that moment, Rowena stepped forward, wanting to talk to Michael as his elder sister. But before she could say anything, something inside her gave way, and she fainted on the spot. "I cannot let him go. He took something from me and I will take something from him," Michael said in a cold, unwavering voice. His eyes glinted with anger and determination. Diana and Sabrina pleaded with him to let go of Noah, but Michael was resolute. "I have shown enough kindness to your family, made myself a clown," he said, his voice dripping with bitterness. "No more kindness. The Dark Lord does not show mercy. Come out, Andreas." With a cold voice, Michael called out to Andreas, knowing that he was attached to Noah's soul. With Noah's limp body held tightly by the neck in one hand, the Dark Lord delivered a powerful blow to his chest with an open palm. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through Noah's body, causing his soul to convulse and tremble within. Slowly, Andreas' soul began to emerge from Noah's body, drawn out by the sheer force of the Dark Lord's attack. It was a ghastly sight to behold, like watching a wraith emerge from the depths of the underworld. The battlefield of Nagaland lay in ruins and destruction, with corpses strewn all over the ground and the once grand buildings reduced to rubble. The air was heavy with the stench of blood and death, and the sight of the devastation caused by the Dark Lord's army filled Andreas' eyes with anger and dread. "What have you done?" Andreas demanded, his voice thick with a mixture of rage and fear. Andreas looked at Michael with a mixture of dread and anger. You know you cannot kill Noah without the God-killing arrows. Killing him now would only bring more pain and death to this world, he said with conviction. Andreas turned his gaze towards Diana, a mixture of sadness and anger on his face. I told you, Diana. I told you that your son would only bring pain and suffering to your family and to the world. But you were blinded by your love for him and failed to see what he had become, he said, pointing towards their death and destruction. Andreas looked around at the destruction that had been wrought upon the once beautiful city. Bodies littered the ground, blood pooling around them in gruesome patterns. Buildings that had once stood tall and proud were now mere ruins, the sounds of explosions and gunfire still ringing in their ears. Do you see what your son has done? Andreas said, his voice filled with anger and frustration. He has brought nothing but death and destruction to this world. He has caused so much pain and suffering, and for what? Power? Control? It's madness. Michael snickered and looked at Andreas with cold eyes. All of this destruction and death is because of your obsession with defeating me, Andreas. Your manipulation and schemes have caused this chaos, he said, his grip on Noah's neck tightening. Andreas' expression turned to one of anger and defiance. I did what I had to do to protect the world from your darkness, he spat back. Your thirst for power and control would only bring ruin and destruction to this world, to everyone's shock, Diana shouted at Andreas, interrupting his conversation with Michael. This is all because of you. You manipulated and twisted the truth to turn my sons against each other. You're the reason they're fighting and the reason for all this death and destruction, she shouted, pointing at the devastation around them. Diana's eyes blazed with anger as she glared at Andreas. She took a step closer to Andreas, her fists clenched in fury. I wish you were never a part of our lives. You brought nothing but pain and misery to us, she yelled. Her voice echoed across the battlefield, and all eyes turned to her. Andreas simply sneered in response. You're blind with love, Diana. You fail to see what your son has done to this world, he retorted, his eyes glittering with malice. Diana's anger only grew at Andreas' words, and she took another step closer. Don't you dare talk to me about love. You don't know the first thing about it, she spat. Andreas' eyes showed a tinge of pain after Diana's words pierced through him like a sword. She looked at him with fire in her eyes, her anger palpable. Despite the pain in his eyes, Andreas knew he had to make the hard decisions to stop the Dark Lord, even if it meant hurting the people he cared about. He knew that the fate of the world was at stake, and he couldn't let his emotions cloud his judgment. He knew what he had to do, and he hoped that one day, everyone would understand why he had to make this sacrifice. A fiery rage coursed through Michael as he glared at Andreas. The man's constant manipulations and schemes had pushed him to his limit, and he was now determined to put an end to it once and for all. The Dark Lord's eyes blazed with an intense fury as he spoke, his voice filled with conviction. I may not be able to kill Noah without the God-killing arrows, but you, Andreas, are a different story. His words hung in the air, heavy with a sense of finality, as his eyes glowed with eerie darkness. The atmosphere was charged with tension as Michael's words echoed across the ruins of the once great city. Michael's eyes blazed with an intensity that sent shivers down everyone's spine. Even Andreas, who had always been the calm one, felt a sense of dread as he looked at the Dark Lord. I've had enough of your games, Andreas. You've played with me for far too long. Your schemes end here, and so does your existence. The world will be better off without you, and I'll be the one to make it happen. As he spoke, Michael's aura darkened, and a chilling silence fell upon the battlefield. Even the wind seemed to still, as if in anticipation of the coming clash between the Dark Lord and his nemesis. Everyone around them knew that a battle of epic proportions was about to take place, one that would decide the fate of the world itself. Without giving Andreas a chance to speak, Michael threw Noah aside and moved with lightning speed. Michael's eyes blazed with eerie darkness as he grabbed Andreas' ethereal form by his shoulders. Andreas struggled to break free, but Michael's grip was ironclad as he squeezed with all his might. A scream escaped Andreas' lips as he felt his ethereal form beginning to dissipate into smoke. In a sudden, unexpected move, Michael opened his mouth wide, and the smoke-like form of Andreas' soul was drawn into his mouth. Andreas squirmed and writhed, his screams growing louder as Michael devoured his soul, stripping it from his body. The air was thick with tension and the sound of Andreas' screams as Michael continued to consume his soul. It was a dark and ominous sight, and even the most powerful beings present couldn't help but feel a sense of dread and awe as they watched the scene unfold. Finally, with a final burst of energy, Michael consumed Andreas' soul entirely, and he let out a loud roar of triumph. The air around him crackled with energy as he stood, a new darkness emanating from him, powerful and undeniable. As Michael consumed Andreas' soul, a sudden gust of wind blew across the battlefield, causing everyone to stumble. The sky grew darker and the storm around them intensified, lightning crackling across the sky with a deafening roar. The air around Michael crackled with energy as he consumed the soul, causing everyone to feel a sense of dread and horror at what they were witnessing. The storm raged on as the ground beneath their feet shook violently, causing debris to fall from the surrounding buildings. Those who witnessed Michael's actions stood frozen in fear and disbelief, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. The dark energy radiating from Michael's body seemed to consume everything around him, making the already chaotic battlefield even more terrifying. After he consumed Andreas' soul, Michael's eyes narrowed as he looked toward Noah, who was now lying unconscious on the ground. Turning to face Diana and Sabrina, he spoke in a cold, unwavering voice, "The truth changes nothing. If he ever dares to stand in my way again, I will not hesitate to end his life." His words hung in the air with a chilling finality, leaving no room for argument. Diana revealing the truth about Noah's identity as Michael's brother had a profound impact on her and her entire family. The revelation shook the very foundations of their beliefs, and their lives were forever changed. For Diana, the truth brought immense guilt and shame for hiding the secret for so long. She couldn't bear to look at Michael after revealing the truth, knowing the pain she had caused him by abandoning him as a child. The knowledge that her two sons were on opposite sides of a brutal war tore her apart inside, and she was consumed with regret for not being able to protect them both. Despite the revelation that Noah was his brother, Michael's feelings of abandonment and betrayal still weighed heavily on him. His anger and desire for revenge had consumed him for so long that it was difficult for him to let go of those feelings, even in the face of this newfound familial connection. The pain of being cast aside by his own mother had left deep wounds that still had not fully healed, and it was those wounds that had fueled his darker impulses for so many years. Though there was a part of him that longed for the comfort and love of a family, that softer side of him had been overshadowed by his pain and anger. As Michael looked upon Noah, his unconscious form a stark reminder of the pain and betrayal he had felt for so long, he couldn't help but feel that nothing had truly changed. The truth of their shared bloodline couldn't erase the years of suffering and pain he had endured. Why I don't get any super gifts from my wonderful readers. Sad face. Chapter 935, Celsus' plan. Amidst the chaos of the war between the Dark Lord's army and the Nagaland soldiers, Selisi and Andreas' second soul piece floated far away, watching the battle unfold from a safe distance. As the Dark Lord consumed Andreas' soul from within Noah's body, a twisted grin spread across the face of Andreas' second soul piece. Despite the destruction and carnage happening below, he was elated to see the Dark Lord destroy the soul piece that had been with Noah for so long. As soon as the Dark Lord had consumed Andreas' soul, a strange darkness began to surround Andreas' second soul piece, causing it to glow with an eerie light. The ethereal form grew stronger and more substantial, becoming less transparent as it absorbed the darkness. The once weak soul piece had been revitalized by the energy released from the destruction of Andreas' soul, and it was now more powerful than ever before. Celsus' emotions were not those of sadness or regret over the destruction of Nagaland. Instead, an almost manic excitement shone in her eyes as she watched the battle between the Dark Lord and Nagaland soldiers unfold. To her, this war was just the beginning of a chain of events that would ultimately lead to the fall of the Great Eight Clans. Selisi had long known that the revelation of the Dark Lord being Noah's brother would trigger a shift in power, and she was prepared to seize the opportunity. Her goal was simple: to see her shadow clan rise from the ashes of the Great Eight Clans and emerge as the dominant force in the world. Selisi understood that the current system of 8 divided clans made it impossible to fight against the Dark Lord and his growing army effectively. To truly defeat him, the world needed a united front led by a single, powerful clan. With this in mind, Selisi watched the battle unfold with a twisted sense of excitement, knowing that the chaos it brought would ultimately play into her hands. The destruction of Nagaland was just the first step in a grander plan to reshape the world in her image. How does it feel to see the Dark Lord consume your soul piece? Selisi asked Andrea's second soul piece, her eyes glowing with a devilish glint. A wicked grin spread across Andrea's second soul piece as he replied, "Good, very good. I've been waiting for his destruction for so long." Selisi couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement at the prospect of the Dark Lord's downfall. She had been waiting for this moment for years, and now it was finally within reach. But there was one thing she still didn't understand. "I still don't get how you grow stronger with the destruction of your other soul pieces," she mused, her eyes narrowing in confusion. Andrea's second soul piece chuckled darkly, his eyes glowing with eerie darkness. "It's simple, my dear Selisi. With each destruction, the darkness within me grows stronger. And as the darkness within me grows, so does my power." Selisi felt a chill run down her spine as she listened to his words. She knew that Andrea's second soul piece was not to be underestimated, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease at the thought of what he was capable of. But she pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the upcoming battle that would determine the fate of the world. Andrea's second soul piece grinned devilishly. "The Dark Lord may be the god of darkness in this universe, but the darkness I serve is universal," he replied. "It powers me and gives me strength beyond what Andreas could have ever imagined." He was a fool to ignore such power when he could have easily embraced it and finished the Dark Lord himself. Selisi listened intently, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew that with Andrea's second soul piece by her side, she could become the most powerful force in the universe. Together, they could conquer all of the 8 clans and establish the Shadow Clan as the dominant force in the world. Looking at Andrea's second soul piece, Selisi felt a sense of excitement coursing through her veins. She knew that with his power and her cunning, they could achieve anything they set their minds to. And she was determined to make it happen. As Andreas surveyed the wreckage of Nagaland, his eyes fell upon the lifeless body of Castien and the broken form of Zanali. Turning to Selisi, he asked with a mix of anger and disdain, "How do you plan to avenge Castien's death and heal Zanali? Are you not moved by the loss of your own husband and daughter?" Sales's response was cold and callous, without a hint of remorse. She waved her hand dismissively, as if the lives lost were of little consequence. "I don't plan to," she replied flatly. "Noah will take care of it once he wakes from his coma. The death of his love Edith and the state of Zanali will fuel his anger towards the Dark Lord, overshadowing any familial bond he might form." Andreas couldn't help but feel smile at Sales's lack of compassion. He knew the path Noah was headed down, and it was one of destruction and chaos. "The world is changing, Selisi," Andreas said calmly. "Don't forget that you can't just sit back and let the pieces fall where they may. The consequences will be dire for everyone, including your clan." But Selisi merely chuckled, her eyes gleaming with ambition. "The world has always been changing, Andreas. The strong will always rise to the top, and I plan on being on the winning side. Noah will take care of the Dark Lord, and my clan will reap the rewards." It's as simple as that. Andreas looked at Selisi with a sense of cold detachment, realizing that they were both cut from the same cloth. They were both cunning, calculative, and merciless, willing to do whatever it takes to achieve their goals, even if it meant sacrificing others in the process. In a way, they deserved each other. They were both driven by their desire for power and control, and they would stop at nothing to achieve it. Andreas couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction at the thought of teaming up with Selisi to take down the Dark Lord, knowing that they both shared the same ruthless mindset. Selisi turned to Andreas, her eyes cold and calculating. "Once the Dark Lord leaves Nagaland, I want you to take out Noah's team of elites," she instructed. "We need to eliminate any potential threats to our plan, and those elites are at the top of the list." Andreas nodded, his expression just as cold and calculating as Celsus. Understood, he replied. And what about Hammond? Bring him to our place, Celisi said, a hint of greed in her voice. We need his genius to help us dismantle the Dark Lord's army piece by piece. He'll be a valuable asset to our cause. And what about Noah? Andreas asked, knowing the answer but wanting to hear it from Celisi herself. Leave him be, Celisi said dismissively. He's of no use to us now. But make sure to make it look like the Dark Lord killed his elites. We want Noah to focus every bit of anger toward the Dark Lord. Otherwise, he might become softer. Andreas nodded again, feeling no compassion or mercy for anyone in this situation. He and Celisi were both ruthless and cunning, willing to do whatever it took to achieve their goals, no matter the cost. A month ago, when the Dark Lord arrived at Noah's house to help his father, the news reporters caught wind of it and stirred up a political storm. They questioned Noah's competency as the Supreme Guardian, claiming that he should have been the one to fight the Dark Lord, not seek his help. Celisi couldn't help but feel a sense of amusement at the chaos that ensued. She knew that the media would never be satisfied, always searching for the next big story to exploit. And this story was too good to pass up. The Supreme Guardian, the one tasked with protecting the world, seeking the help of the very enemy he was supposed to defeat. But Celisi saw through the surface-level drama. She knew that Noah had his reasons for seeking the Dark Lord's help, and she respected his decision to do so. After all, they were both fighting for the same cause, to rid the world of darkness and bring about a new era of light. But the media didn't care about the bigger picture. They only cared about sensational headlines and pushing their own agendas. And so, they pounced on the opportunity to question Noah's abilities and authority. Despite the negative attention, Celisi remained unfazed. She knew that Noah was more than capable of leading the fight against the Dark Lord, and she had faith that he would emerge victorious in the end. As for the media, they were merely an annoyance that she would have to endure as they continued to sensationalize every little detail of the ongoing battle. Celisi had always held a low opinion of the media, believing them to be nothing more than a group of sensationalist troublemakers. But even she couldn't deny the power they held, especially in times of political unrest. So, despite her disdain for them, she decided to use the media to her advantage. She knew that stirring up controversy and chaos would only serve to invalidate the Great Eight clans and further strengthen her own clan's position. With a cold and calculating demeanor, she plotted out her strategy, carefully crafting each move to maximize the chaos and destruction. She instructed her followers to plant false information and sow seeds of dissent, creating a climate of fear and mistrust. The media ate it up, eager for any juicy scandal to report on. And as the chaos grew, Celisi watched with a sense of grim satisfaction, knowing that she was manipulating the situation to her own advantage. Her ruthless cunning was unmatched, and she knew that she could use the media's obsession with drama to further her own goals. And so, she continued to pull the strings from behind the scenes, reveling in the chaos and destruction that she had created. Celisi couldn't contain her excitement at the revelation that the Dark Lord and Noah were brothers. She knew that this information would send shockwaves throughout the world and create chaos beyond measure. The media would have a field day, and Celisi planned to use it to her advantage. Andreas' eyes gleamed with a cunning intensity as he spoke. Are you sure we should leave Layla and the spirit child alone? I am certain I could turn the spirit child into a perfect weapon against the Dark Lord. Celisi, however, shook her head with calm resolve. I've heard from my contacts in Mazeroth that Layla and the spirit child are in the Ukulun realm. The Dark Lord sent them there to keep them safe. Andreas raised an eyebrow in surprise. But why would the Dark Lord do that? It doesn't make sense. Celsus' lips curled into a small smile. It's good news for us. Let the spirit child be trained by the best teachers in the world. If we trained him ourselves, he would become a one-trick pony who solely depends on his cultivation power. And that power alone will not be enough to defeat the Dark Lord. Andreas seemed unconvinced. But we could mold him to be the ultimate weapon against the Dark Lord. Celsus' expression hardened. To defeat the Dark Lord, we need to use our brains more than our brawn. Let the spirit child be for now, and he'll tell you when the time is right to use him against the Dark Lord. Andreas nodded, reluctantly conceding to Celsus' wisdom. He knew he would have to bide his time and wait for the right moment to strike. Celsus' eyes shifted towards Gaia, the Dark Queen, as she spoke with a cunning glint in her eyes. The spirit child is not our concern at the moment, it's Gaia. As long as she stands by the Dark Lord's side, he is nearly invincible. She is his most powerful weapon, and we need to find a way to neutralize her. Andreas raised an eyebrow, intrigued by Celsus' suggestion. And how do you propose we do that? Celisi smirked, her mind already working on a plan. We need to exploit her weakness. Gaia may be powerful, but she is not invincible. There must be a way to take her down. We just need to find it. Andreas nodded in agreement, the two of them lost in thought as they plotted their next move. They knew that taking down Gaia would not be an easy feat, but they were willing to do whatever it took to defeat the Dark Lord and take their place as rulers of the new world. The sky grew darker, and a storm raged on in the distance, a fitting backdrop to the chaos that lay ahead. The fate of the world hung in the balance, and Celisi and Andreas were determined to come out on top, no matter the cost. Chapter 936, Into the Kingdom of Beasts. As Norvin and the gray-haired old man made their way through the forest, the sound of dried leaves crunching beneath their feet filled the air. The trees around them were tall and imposing, their branches reaching up to the sky. The air was cool and crisp, and the sun shone down on them, filtering through the leaves above. Norvin's golden fur shone brilliantly in the sunlight, his massive 6 feet tall towering body over the old man beside him. The old man was dressed in a traditional butler uniform, complete with a gray vest, white shirt, and black bow tie. His gray hair was neatly combed and slicked back, giving him a regal appearance. As they continued on their journey, the old man suddenly stopped, his keen senses detecting something in the air. Despite the cloudy afternoon, he sensed an impending storm and urged Norvin to set up camp before it hit. "Young Master Norvin, we should camp here," the old man said urgently. "I sense a storm is coming, and we must take shelter before it's too late." Norvin nodded in agreement, knowing that his companion's instincts were always spot on. They quickly set up camp, securing their belongings and sheltering under a large tree. As the clouds grew darker and the wind picked up, Norvin couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He had faced many challenges in his life, but there was something about this impending storm that made him feel on edge. Norvin and Samuel had set up camp in a small clearing of the forest, the sun filtering through the canopy of tall trees. Norvin's golden fur glistened in the light, a stark contrast to the dried leaves covering the forest floor. But despite the calm atmosphere, Norvin's mind was troubled. "Tell me, Samuel. Did I make the right choice in leaving Nagaland?" Norvin asked, his gaze distant. Samuel, the gray-haired butler, sat down on the ground beside him. "Young master, I know you are hurting, but you made the right choice. You cannot be near the Dark Lord and his army." Norvin's voice was filled with regret as he spoke. "But what if my absence brings doom upon them? The Dark Lord and his army are capable of terrible destruction. You know what he did to the island of Ithalan in revenge. What if he does the same to Nagaland?" Samuel shook his head, trying to reassure Norvin. "He wouldn't do that, young master. Nagaland is the Dark Queen Gaia's homeland. He wouldn't destroy his betrothed's homeland." But Norvin couldn't shake off his feelings of guilt and responsibility. "I just hope they can hold their own against the Dark Lord's army. I wish I could be there to help." Samuel placed a comforting hand on Norvin's shoulder. "I understand, young master. But we must have faith in Yigmis Zanali and the other guardians. They will do everything in their power to protect Nagaland." Norvin nodded slowly, still feeling the weight of his decision. But as the sun set and the storm clouds gathered overhead, he couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. He had a feeling that his absence would have greater consequences than he had initially anticipated. "Rest now, young master. We'll arrive at the safe house by sunrise tomorrow." Samuel suggested that Norvin get some rest, but Norvin was in no mindset for sleeping. His thoughts were consumed by the fact that he had left his best friend and brother, Noah, behind in Nagaland while he fled for safety. Now, Noah was in a coma and unconscious, vulnerable to the dangers of the Dark Lord's army. Norvin felt a deep sense of guilt and regret for not being there to protect him. To make matters worse, Alicia, Noah's wife, had left for Ar to seek an alliance with the Empress to fight against the Dark Lord. With both Norvin and Alicia absent from Noah's side, Norvin felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. He leaned his head back against the tree and closed his eyes, but his mind was racing. The thought of Noah's life hanging in the balance made it impossible for him to rest. The only thing he could do was to keep moving forward, to reach the safe house and regroup with their allies. Samuel watched over him with a sense of concern, knowing that the weight of the situation was heavy on Norvin's shoulders. He silently prayed for their safe passage to the safe house, hoping that they could reunite with their loved ones and face the challenges ahead as a united front. While Samuel was sitting by the campfire, a sudden sharp pain ripped through Samuel's gut, causing him to let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the silent forest. Norvin's thoughts were jolted out of his mind by Samuel's agonizing cry, and he leapt to his side, desperation in his eyes. "What's happening to you, Samuel?" Norvin asked urgently, but the old man could only writhe in pain and let out another anguished cry. Then, as suddenly as it began, Samuel fell silent and lost consciousness. Norvin's heart skipped a beat at the sight of the old man lying motionless on the ground. Panicked, Norvin examined Samuel's body, and his eyes widened in horror as he sensed a disruption in Samuel's soul. It was as though a part of his soul had been violently ripped away, leaving behind an emptiness that chilled Norvin to the bone. What could have caused this? Norvin muttered to himself, his mind racing. He knew that such an injury to the soul was not something that could be easily mended, and the implications of this attack weighed heavily on his mind. Who or what could have caused such a thing? And why had they targeted Samuel? As Norvin tended to Samuel's unconscious body, his mind raced with questions and fears. The journey ahead suddenly seemed much more treacherous than before, and he knew that they would have to be even more vigilant if they were to survive the dangers that lay ahead. Unknown to Norvin, the sharp pain that suddenly struck Samuel's body was no coincidence. It occurred precisely at the same moment Michael consumed Andreas' soul from Noah's body in Nagaland. Little did Norvin know that Andreas had left a small piece of his soul in Samuel's body, and when Michael destroyed that part of the soul, the remaining piece in Samuel's body was also destroyed. Fortunately, the second soul part of Andreas, which was with Salisi, was not affected since the soul piece in Samuel's body was from the soul part of Andreas, which was with Noah. Norvin examined Samuel's condition and concluded that the old man needed rest to recover from the sudden pain he had experienced. Satisfied that Samuel would be okay, Norvin covered him with a warm blanket and climbed up a nearby tree to keep watch. Despite Samuel's stable condition, Norvin couldn't help but be plagued by thoughts of what had caused the sudden disruption in his body. Peering into the distant sky, he kept watch over the sleeping Samuel. The forest was eerily quiet except for the occasional rustling of leaves and twigs under the weight of nocturnal animals. The thought of the Beast King's kingdom brought a sense of both relief and apprehension to Norvin. He had heard of the powerful beast men and their imposing ruler, but had never met them himself. The idea of seeking refuge in their kingdom was daunting, but with the Dark Lord's army on his trail, it seemed like the only viable option. As Norvin sat in contemplation, his thoughts kept drifting to Noah's condition. He couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt for leaving his friend and brother behind, vulnerable to the Dark Lord's wrath. Norvin knew he had made the right choice by leaving, but the weight of responsibility weighed heavily on his shoulders. Suddenly, a twig snapped in the distance, jolting Norvin out of his thoughts. His heart raced as he peered into the darkness, trying to make out any movement or shape. Was it the Dark Lord's army hot on his trail? Or was it just a stray animal? Norvin's heart raced as he heard a rustling in the nearby bushes. He knew better than to let his guard down, especially in these treacherous times. Without hesitation, he leaped up into the nearest tree and climbed higher, scanning the area for any signs of danger. His golden fur glistened in the light, and his senses were on high alert as he listened intently for any sound that might give away an attacker's presence. His mind raced with thoughts of the Dark Lord's army and what they might be capable of. He couldn't afford to take any chances, not when so much was at stake. As he surveyed the area, his grip on the tree tightened, and he readied himself for any incoming threat. Norvin's keen eyesight caught a glimpse of movement in the distance, and he narrowed his eyes to get a better look. As the beast men drew closer, he saw that they resembled a pack of wolves. Their fur was sleek and dark, blending in with the shadows of the forest. They moved with a graceful, predatory gait that sent shivers down Norvin's spine. Despite his fear, Norvin kept his guard up and watched the group's approach carefully. He didn't know their names or identities, but he could tell that they were skilled warriors. Each of them carried a weapon and wore a fierce expression of years of training and experience. As the pack of wolf-like beast men approached Norvin's campsite, Norvin tensed up, unsure of their intentions. The pack leader, a towering beast with thick gray fur and piercing yellow eyes, stood at a distance and bared his fangs, growling a warning. Norvin slowly raised his hands in a show of non-aggression, but kept a watchful eye on the pack. The leader spoke in a low, guttural voice, asking Norvin why he was venturing into the territory of the Beast Kingdom. Norvin hesitated, unsure of how much he should reveal. He knew that the Beast Kingdom was a powerful and feared nation, and he didn't want to reveal too much about his own mission. "I am seeking refuge," Norvin finally replied, keeping his tone neutral. "I am in need of a safe place to rest and regroup." The pack leader sniffed the air, as if testing Norvin's words for any signs of deceit. The other members of the pack circled around Norvin's campsite, their eyes glowing in the darkness. Norvin could feel his heart racing as he watched the pack warily. "Do not lie," the pack leader growled. Norvin could feel the tension in the air, and he knew that he needed to choose his words carefully. He could easily take down these wolves, but he didn't want to start a needless fight. "I'm not lying," Norvin said, holding up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "We have permission from the Beast King to enter his kingdom. We're here to seek refuge and speak with him about the Dark Lord's invasion." The wolves exchanged a look, but their leader remained unconvinced. He took a step forward, his eyes fixed on Norvin. "Prove it," he snarled. "What kind of proof do you have that the Beast King has agreed to meet with you?" Norvin hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to prove his words. But then he remembered the small medallion that the Beast King had given him as a sign of his invitation. Reaching into his pocket, Norvin pulled out the medallion and held it up for the wolves to see. "This is the proof you seek," he said. "The Beast King gave me this medallion as a sign of his invitation. We mean no harm, we just seek refuge from the Dark Lord's forces." The leader of the pack eyed the medallion warily, but after a moment, he nodded his head in acceptance. "Very well," he said. "You may pass. But be warned, monkey. We won't hesitate to strike you down if you try anything." Norvin nodded, relieved that the tense standoff was over. Once the wolves believed him, Norvin pointed at the unconscious Samuel. "He is taking a much-needed rest. Once he wakes up, we will be on our way to the safe house," said Norvin, pointing to Samuel who was sleeping peacefully. The pack leader looked at Samuel, then turned his gaze back to Norvin with a fierce stare. "Whatever you do, get to the safe house before midnight," he growled. "The Beast Kingdom has its own problems, and the last thing I want is to clean up your corpses from the ground." With that ominous warning, the pack of wolves quickly vanished into the darkness of the forest, leaving Norvin alone with his thoughts. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he considered the warning. What kind of problems did the Beast Kingdom have? And why did the pack leader seem so hesitant to trust him? Unbeknownst to Norvin, the Beast Kingdom was not as safe from the Dark Lord's influence as he had hoped. The kingdom had its own share of internal issues, and the Dark Lord had his own spies planted within its borders, including a number of powerful vampires. These vampires, with their keen senses and exceptional tracking abilities, made it all too easy for the Dark Lord to keep tabs on the kingdom's movements and keep his finger on the pulse of its politics. The Beast King knew that agreeing to help Norvin would make him a target of the Dark Lord's wrath. The Dark Lord believed that Norvin had killed Nightmare, and would stop at nothing to exact his revenge. In doing so, the Beast King had entered a dangerous game of cat and mouse with the Dark Lord, where one misstep could mean the end of his kingdom. Meanwhile, Khaleesi and her shadow clans were also plotting against the Dark Lord. They were cunning and ruthless and would do anything to stop him. The two factions had their own separate plans and strategies, but both aimed to take down the Dark Lord and put an end to his reign of terror. The stakes were high, and the outcome was uncertain. Only time would tell how the Dark Lord would face these plots against him, and whether the Beast King and Sales's plans would come to fruition. Keep your gifts coming. Shameless author alert. Chapter 937, Andor's Future Plans. Andor sat on his throne, his eyes fixated on the live feed of Nagaland playing before him. He relished every moment of Michael's suffering as Diana revealed herself to be his mother. Andor's laughter echoed through the empty halls of his castle, a sound that was almost maniacal. Suddenly, the feed began to flicker, and a bright light appeared before Andor. He was taken aback, wondering what was happening. The light grew brighter until it took on the form of a woman. Andor recognized her instantly. "Seraphine?" he asked incredulously, tilting his head in disbelief. "It has been quite some time since we last met, Andor," the goddess replied with a gentle but powerful voice. Andor frowned, trying to comprehend why a goddess would suddenly appear before him. He had been trapped in this mortal realm for 6,000 years with no way to leave. He wondered what Seraphine's motives were. "If you meant 6,000 years ago, then yes, it has been quite some time," Andor quipped, trying to hide his suspicion. Seraphine chuckled softly, a sound that made Andor's skin crawl. "I see you still have your sense of humor," she replied. Andor leaned back on his throne, crossing his arms over his chest. Andor's eyes narrowed at the sound of Seraphine's voice, the embodiment of all that he despised about the realm of the gods. He bristled at the urgency in her words, a reminder of the ancient duty he had abandoned long ago. Despite his outward calm, Andor seethed with anger at the thought of being dragged back into the politics of the Pantheon. "What do you want from me, Seraphine?" Andor growled, his voice laced with venom. Seraphine's form flickered, her light growing brighter as if in a warning. "You know why I'm here," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. Seraphine didn't seem to take offense at Andor's tone, continuing with a sense of urgency. "The third seal has been broken, Andor. Dagon is planning to ascend to our realm once again with his army of Hellwalkers." Andor remained unmoved, his anger towards the Dark Lord overshadowing any sense of duty to the realm of gods. "I'm pretty sure Morrigan will take care of that," he snickered, showing his disdain for the god of war. "The last time I checked, it was your duty to prevent Dagon from ascending to the realm of gods," Seraphine reminded him. Andor's voice dripped with venom as he retorted, "Well, the last time I checked, I can't even leave this damn castle. So if you have a way to break the seal and let me out of here, I might go deal with Dagon out of the goodness in my heart." He knew he was treading a dangerous line, for if he showed too much hatred towards his own kind, the gods might find a way to keep him in the mortal realm for longer. But he couldn't hide his anger and hatred towards the realm of gods anymore, not when he had been trapped in the mortal realm for 6,000 years. Seraphine looked at him with a sense of disappointment and sadness. "Your hatred blinds you, Andor. You were once a noble and just god, but your anger towards the Dark Lord has consumed you and made you forget your duty to our realm. You are needed in the war against Dagon, but first, you must let go of your anger and remember who you truly are." Andor's face twisted with rage. "You know nothing of what I have endured, Seraphine. You and the other gods have no right to judge me. My hatred is not what blinded me, Seraphine. It was my own kind that forgot about me. None of you bothered to check on me until you want something from me. Tell me, goddess of all information, how many times have you checked on me?" "None." Andor's voice grew louder as he continued. "For a goddess of information, you seem to have no clue that I am trapped in this damn castle. So tell me, how am I supposed to deal with Dagon? And why would I want to help you even if I could?" The tension in the room was palpable as Seraphine regarded Andor with a mix of sadness and frustration. "We are not blind to your plight, Andor. We have not forgotten you. But you must remember that our realm is in danger. We need your help and are willing to do what we can to assist you in leaving this castle." Andor was taken aback by the sudden offer of help. His anger and hatred for the gods had blinded him to any possibility of assistance from them. But deep down, he was still desperate to leave the mortal realm any way he could, even if it meant working with his own kind whom he despised. He suppressed his rage and considered the offer for a moment. Sensing that Andor was not going to interrupt her, Seraphine took the chance to continue speaking. Seraphine leaned forward, her voice low and urgent. "Andor, listen to me. Dagon cannot escape the hell without first breaking several powerful artifacts that keep him imprisoned there. He cannot destroy them himself, so he is sending his Hell Walkers to do it. We need the Sky Hall to fight against these Hell Walkers and protect the artifacts. If they are destroyed, nothing will stop him from ascending to our realm." Andor listened to Seraphine intently, weighing his options as he considered her proposal. Although he still harbored a deep-seated anger towards his fellow gods, he knew that he was also desperate to leave the mortal realm, and the opportunity to do so might be worth considering. "Let us assume for a moment that I am willing to assist you," he said slowly, eyeing Seraphine with suspicion. "But what makes you think that the Sky Hall alone will be enough to stop Dagon and his army of Hell Walkers?" "Breaking things is always easier than preventing them from being broken, and even if I were to agree to send the Sky Hall to this fight, Dagon would eventually find a way to break the artifacts without any gods fighting against him." Seraphine nodded gravely. "We are aware of that. That is why we need the Sky Hall to delay Dagon as long as possible until the Dark Lord can break 3 more seals. Once that happens, we can send a god from the Pantheon to the mortal realm and engage in battle with Dagon's army directly." Andor's frustration was palpable as he slammed his hand on the armrest of his throne. "So, you're telling me that you could send a god to the mortal realm but not bring me back? This is outrageous," he exclaimed. Seraphine's expression softened slightly. "I understand your anger, Andor. But the rules of our realm are not always fair." Andor scoffed. "Rules? The Dark Lord doesn't follow any rules. He has already caused so much destruction, and yet the Pantheon still underestimates him. Dagon may be a threat, but he's nothing compared to the Dark Lord." Andor's eyes blazed with fury as he confronted Seraphine. "Why does the Pantheon continue to underestimate the Dark Lord? He is a much greater threat than Dagon could ever be. Why not send a god to the mortal realm to take him out?" Seraphine's expression was grave as she responded, "Because we are still here, Andor. The Dark Lord is not. The previous Dark Lord was forced to reset the mortal universe as a last resort. Even at his peak, he only managed to kill some weak gods. Dagon, on the other hand, could threaten the very existence of the Pantheon itself." Andor seethed with anger, knowing that his own hatred for the Dark Lord was consuming him, blinding him to the true danger that lay ahead. Despite his loathing for the gods, he knew that he needed their help to escape the mortal realm. But at what cost? Would he be forced to fight alongside those he despised to save the very realm he had grown to hate? Seraphine's voice rang out with a tinge of disappointment and frustration. "Do not forget your true purpose, Andor. You were sent to the mortal realm to eliminate the threat that Dagon poses to our world," she reminded him. 6,000 years ago, the Pantheon had tasked Andor with the mission to end Dagon's existence. However, Andor's stubbornness and hatred towards the Dark Lord had clouded his judgment and he ended up fighting the wrong enemy. His reckless actions had nearly cost him his life, and Andor's anger had only grown since then, causing him to forget his original mission. Seraphine's voice was firm and determined as she made her offer to Andor. "If you help the Pantheon defeat Dagon and the other fallen gods, I will personally make sure that the Dark Lord pays for what he did to you. Whatever the cost, I will find a way to bring you out of the mortal realm and restore you to your rightful place among the gods." Her words hung in the air, a tantalizing promise of revenge and redemption. Andor's eyes gleamed with a sudden realization that the gods' offer was too good to refuse. Despite his loathing towards the gods, he had no doubt in their power and authority. Their word was as good as gold, and if they promised him anything, they would keep it no matter the cost. Andor knew that dealing with the Dark Lord would require a lot of planning, strategy, and cunning. However, with the Pantheon's help, he could deal with the Dark Lord directly, using brute strength and force, something that he was exceptionally skilled at. Andor expressed his concern to Seraphine. If I commit the Skyhall's resources to fight against Dagon and his army, that would leave the Dark Lord unchecked. How can we be sure that it's the best course of action? Seraphine chuckled at Andor's words. You underestimate the power of the goddess of information, Andor. I know all that happens in the mortal realm, including your contingency plans. The Shadow Clan is one of them, is it not? And even if you had no plans, letting the Dark Lord run rampant will work in our favor. The more chaos he causes, the easier it will be for us to sway the Pantheon to end his existence. Andor was taken aback by Seraphine's knowledge. He had always been careful to keep his plans hidden from the gods, but he should have known better than to think he could keep secrets from the goddess of information. He sighed, realizing that he had no choice but to agree to Seraphine's proposal. If it meant he could finally exact his revenge on the Dark Lord, he was willing to sacrifice the Skyhall's resources and let the Dark Lord run rampant in the mortal realm. Fine, I'll help you. But remember, Seraphine, I'm doing this for my own reasons, not for the realm of gods, Andor said, his voice laced with bitterness and anger. Seraphine nodded, her expression solemn. I understand, Andor. But we need your help now more than ever. Dagon poses a threat to our entire world, and we cannot face him alone. Andor clenched his fists, his rage boiling inside him. He knew that Seraphine was right, but he couldn't help feeling resentful toward the gods. They had abandoned him to the mortal realm for 6,000 years, and now they expected him to come to their aid. But despite his anger, he knew that he couldn't let his personal grudges get in the way of what needed to be done. If he didn't help the Pantheon, they would all be doomed. As the conversation seemed to be coming to an end, Seraphine's voice became more serious. And before we part ways, there is something else you should know, Andor, she said, her tone weighted with importance. Andor raised an eyebrow in curiosity. He knew that whatever Seraphine was about to tell him, it must be something of great importance. There is a fallen god who has taken refuge in the mortal realm and has turned himself into a vampire, Seraphine revealed, her voice filled with urgency. Andor's eyes widened at Seraphine's revelation. A fallen god who turned himself into a vampire? What's his name? He demanded. Ingram, Seraphine replied calmly. He's one of the elder vampires at the table. Andor's mind raced as he processed this new information. A fallen god aiding Dagon, and one who had turned himself into a vampire no less. Andor felt a twinge of amusement at the thought of a fallen god turning himself into an elder vampire. He knew that the fallen gods were capable of anything, but the idea of one of them becoming a vampire was quite unexpected. He couldn't help but picture the fallen god Ingram sitting at a table, dressed in black leather and sipping on a glass of blood, surrounded by other vampires. The irony of it all made Andor chuckle, despite the gravity of the situation. Seraphine couldn't help but feel a sense of respect for Andor. Despite being stripped of his power and stuck in the castle for so long, he still possessed a sharp mind and cunning intellect that made him one of the most powerful gods in their world. She knew that underestimating him would be a grave mistake, as he was capable of outmaneuvering even the most cunning of opponents. It was this resilience and determination that made Seraphine realize that Andor was not to be taken lightly, and that he could prove to be a valuable ally in the fight against Dagon and the other fallen gods. Chapter 938, A Weapon of the Gods. As Seraphine vanished before his eyes, Andor snapped his fingers, summoning a shimmering golden orb before him. With practiced ease, he placed his hands on either side of the orb, causing it to flicker and hum to life. Within seconds, the figures of several of his most trusted underlings materialized within the orb, each one bowing low in reverence to their lord. Despite being stripped of his power and confined to the castle, Andor was still one of the most cunning and powerful gods in his world, with a network of loyal followers at his command. In the vast halls of Skyhall, only a handful of individuals were privy to Andor's existence. These few figures, who controlled every aspect of the Skyhall, served as Andor's eyes and ears in the mortal realm. To the outside world, the Holy Maiden was the public face of the Sky Hall and its leader, but in reality, it was Andor who held the reins of power. Andor and a select group of gods had found the Sky Hall thousands of years ago. Now, only a select few knew about its existence and Andor's involvement in its affairs. "My lord," the figures intoned in unison, their voices laced with deference and awe. Andor had agreed to send the Sky Hall and its resources to fight Dagon and his army of Hell Walkers, but he had no intention of leaving the Dark Lord completely unchecked. Before he dispatched the Sky Hall to battle, he had one last task for them, a mission that would ensure the Dark Lord was kept in check while he was away. "Take the Celestial Sword and deal with the Dark Lord," Andor ordered his underlings with cool detachment. The Celestial Cannon was one of the most powerful weapons in existence, capable of destroying entire armies with a single shot. Only a select few in the Sky Hall knew of its existence, and Andor trusted them implicitly to use it wisely. The figures in the orb immediately bowed their heads in respect and obedience to Andor, their lord and master. Without hesitation, they replied in unison, "As you command, my lord." Their unwavering loyalty to Andor was a testament to the power he held over them and the Sky Hall. Andor knew that he could rely on them to carry out his orders, no matter how dangerous or difficult the task may be. With a wicked smile, Andor gave a final command to his subordinates in the Sky Hall. "Make sure Cobra receives my gift," he said, his tone laced with a hint of malice. Andor was a man of focus and commitment, and sheer will. Andor's unyielding focus and unwavering commitment were the stuff of legends in the realm of gods. Once he set his sights on a task, nothing could divert his attention or weaken his resolve until he achieved his goal. His sheer will was unmatched by any other deity in the pantheon, and it was this tenacity that had allowed him to survive in the mortal realm for 6,000 years. Andor knew that he couldn't afford to divert his attention from the looming threat of Dagon and his army. However, he couldn't ignore the atrocities committed by the Dark Lord in his absence. Andor had already put his Plan B into motion, ensuring that the Dark Lord wouldn't have an easy time while he was away. With a devilish grin, he ordered his trusted followers in the Sky Hall to deliver a special gift to Cobra, one of the Sky Hall's most efficient assets. After consuming Andreas' soul, Michael found himself feeling empty and restless. The loss of Nightmare weighed heavily on his mind, and he struggled to come to terms with the fact that his friend was gone forever. As he thought about Nightmare, Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of anger toward the system. Every time he needed it, the system would malfunction, leaving him to fend for himself. Despite Diana's revelation that she was his mother, Michael felt nothing towards her and her family. They had lived pretending he was dead all these years, and now that the truth was out, it didn't change the fact that they were strangers to him. Michael didn't even bother to spare them a second glance as he turned around to leave Nagaland. Gaia approached Michael with a sense of empathy and understanding. As she floated towards him, she rested her gentle hands on his shoulders, offering a consoling touch to ease his pain. She could feel the weight of his sorrow, heavier than even her own, for the loss of his dear friend Nightmare. But there was something more that added to his agony, something that made her heart ache even more. She knew that Michael was now burdened with the knowledge that his greatest adversary, the one he was fated to fight, was none other than his own brother. The revelation had shattered his world, leaving him to grapple with an overwhelming mix of emotions that were difficult to comprehend. Gaia could only imagine the turmoil he was going through and wished there was something more she could do to comfort him. As Michael was preparing to depart from Nagaland, a sense of unease washed over him, causing every hair on his body to stand on end. The storm that had been raging around the island intensified, casting ominous darkness over the already bleak landscape. Suddenly, a massive shadow loomed over them, and Michael's instincts went into overdrive. He looked up, and his eyes widened in shock as he beheld an enormous ship that resembled a sword. The vessel was gargantuan, dwarfing even the island of Nagaland itself. It was easily the largest ship Michael had ever seen, and it left him and everyone else who witnessed it stunned with disbelief. The sheer size and scale of the ship were awe-inspiring, and it was a terrifying sight to behold. The rogue cultivators, news reporters, and soldiers were stunned when they saw the sudden appearance of the massive sword-shaped ship. Some of them gasped in disbelief, while others were frozen in fear. "What the hell is that?" one of the rogue cultivators muttered, staring up at the imposing ship. "Is that a ship or a floating city?" asked a news reporter, frantically trying to capture footage of the ship with his camera. The soldiers on the ground were equally shocked. "This is unprecedented. We have no record of any ship this size," said one of the commanding officers. As the ship descended closer to the island, its sheer size became more apparent. It was easily 3 times larger than the island of Nagaland and appeared to be made of a dark, metallic material. The ship had intricate designs etched onto its surface, giving it an ancient and ominous appearance. "Holy shit, what is that thing?" one of the soldiers muttered under his breath. "I've never seen anything like it," exclaimed a news reporter, her voice trembling with fear. Another rogue cultivator looked up at the ship in disbelief. "This can't be good. What the fuck is happening?" The ship cast an ominous shadow over the island, making it seem as if the end of the world had come. People ran in every direction, screaming and shouting in fear. "We're all gonna die," yelled a soldier as he fell to his knees, clutching his head in despair. "Get the fuck out of here. We need to warn everyone," another rogue cultivator shouted, trying to rally the others. The ship was massive, larger than anything they had ever seen before. It looked like a sword, but the size was beyond comprehension. The sight of it alone made everyone feel helpless and small. Suddenly, the airship's engines roared to life, its power building as it hummed with energy. Slowly, the tip of the sword-shaped vessel began to emit an eerie purple glow, casting an ominous hue over the island below. The air crackled with electricity, bolts of lightning dancing across the ship's hull. The wind around the ship picked up, causing the trees to bend and sway as if a great storm was approaching. Drowning out all other noise on the island, the sound of the engines grew louder and louder. It became clear that this was no ordinary ship, and the inhabitants of Nagaland watched in awe and fear as it prepared for whatever lay ahead. In an instant, the ship unleashed a devastating beam of energy that barreled straight toward Michael and Gaia, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The sheer force of the blast melted the dark storm clouds that had shrouded Nagaland, revealing the true horror of the situation. Michael tried to react, but a strange energy radiating from the ship slowed down his reflexes and prevented him from using a teleportation scroll. Panic set in as he realized the danger they were in, and Gaia's grip on his shoulder tightened in fear. As the energy beam shot through the air, Rowena's heart skipped a beat as she saw Michael and Gaia in its path. Without a second thought, she launched herself from the rooftop, leaving a powerful shockwave on the ground as she flew at breakneck speed toward Michael. Her mind raced with a jumble of thoughts and emotions, and she knew that she had to act fast. As she flew, she thought of the ancient text she had stumbled upon in the forbidden section of the Sky Hall Library, a text that spoke of a ship beyond mortal comprehension. Could this be it? Was it the ship that the text had warned about? Her heart pounding, Rowena flew towards Michael, feeling the weird energy from the ship slowing down her reflexes. She had to act fast if she was going to save him. Despite the fact that Dean refused to forgive and forget their mother for abandoning him as a child, Rowena couldn't deny that he was still her little brother and that blood was thicker than water. She knew that Dean was misunderstood by the world and that the chaos and destruction he caused had earned him the label of evil, but to her, he was still her little brother. To Rowena, family came first, even above her loyalty to the Sky Hall or her own life. She felt a fierce protectiveness toward both Noah, whom she had watched grow up, and Dean, whom she had only recently learned was her brother. She knew Dean might never understand her loyalty, but she was willing to risk everything to protect him and their family. Driven by her fierce protectiveness towards her family, Rowena knew that she had to do something to save Michael. With no other options in sight, she realized that she had to use the Forbidden Stone, an ancient artifact that had been hidden away in the depths of the Sky Hall's forbidden library for centuries. The energy from the ship had slowed Michael's reflexes, making him unable to use a teleportation scroll, and it was only a matter of time before the beam hit him. Rowena knew that she had to act fast if she wanted to save him. She focused all her energy and determination, racing towards Michael with lightning speed, leaving a trail of crackling energy in her wake. As she drew near, she took out the Forbidden Stone, knowing that using it was a risk that could have dire consequences. But for Rowena, the safety of her family was worth any risk. She pressed the stone to Michael's forehead, and in that moment, a powerful energy surge enveloped them both, transporting them away from the ship's deadly beam. As Michael and Gaia vanished from the path of the beam, Rowena stayed behind to face the full force of the energy blast. The beam hit her squarely, and she felt an intense heat spread through her body. The impact sent her flying through the air, her body tumbling end over end. Diana and Sabrina watched in horror as Rowena was struck, their screams mixing with the sound of the explosion. Diana and Sabrina shouted in terror as they saw Rowena get hit. The sound of the beam hitting Rowena was deafening, and for a moment everything seemed to stand still. When the realization of what had just happened sunk in, the onlookers were left stunned and unsure of how to react. Did she just sacrifice herself to save him? One rogue cultivator whispered, his voice barely audible over the ringing in his ears. But he's the Dark Lord, another said in disbelief. Why would she risk her life for him? Rowena's love for her siblings knew no bounds, and she was always there for them no matter what. She had always been the one to stand up for them and protect them from harm. Her actions in risking her life to save the Dark Lord were a testament to this love and devotion. Even though he was the enemy of many, Rowena couldn't turn her back on him because he was still family. I don't know, a news reporter replied, still in shock from the sudden turn of events. But it looks like she did it without a second thought. The soldiers who had been standing nearby remained silent, unsure of how to process what they had just witnessed. The group stood there in silence as the enormity of what had just happened began to sink in. Rowena had risked her life to save the Dark Lord, a man who was seen by many as the embodiment of evil. And yet, at that moment, all of that seemed to fade away, replaced by the simple fact that one person had saved another. As the dust and debris settled, it became clear that Rowena was no longer in sight. Whether she survived the attack or not remained a mystery. Keep the gifts coming. Chapter 939. In the realm of hell. As Michael and Gaia materialized in the new location, he could feel his skin crawl as he took in the barren, desolate landscape before him. It looked like the fire realm he had been to before, but this place was much darker and more ominous. The air was thick with the stench of sulfur, ash, and decay, and the ground beneath his feet was jagged and treacherous. When he looked around, Michael could see that the sky was a foreboding black, with swirling clouds and bolts of lightning flashing in every direction. There was no sun or moon, no natural light to guide his way. Instead, the only illumination came from the flickering flames that rose up from the molten lava rivers that ran through the realm. The flames cast eerie shadows across the desolate landscape, and Michael could feel the heat from the lava even at this distance. The place seemed like the embodiment of evil and death, and Michael could feel it in his bones. The screams of the damned could be heard echoing through the darkness, and he could sense the presence of malevolent beings lurking in the shadows, eager to inflict pain and suffering on anyone who dared to enter this realm. It was a place of eternal suffering, where the tormented souls were trapped forever, unable to find peace or rest. Gaia's voice broke through the silence that surrounded them, cutting through the thick atmosphere like a knife. "Where are we?" she asked Michael, her eyes scanning the barren, desolate landscape. Despite the absence of any visible life forms, the air was thick with the sounds of screams and cries, like a chorus of agony that echoed through the air. Michael's eyes darted around, taking in the surroundings. He could feel the death and evil in the air, pressing down on him like a heavy weight. His environment scanning showed no signs of life forms, but his instincts told him otherwise. He knew they needed to find a higher vantage point to figure out where they were and where they needed to go. He turned his gaze toward the mountain in the distance, an ominous and foreboding sight that rose up from the bleak landscape. It was a volcanic mountain, with jagged edges and peaks that looked as if some great force had torn them apart. The lava rivers that ran through the realm flowed toward the mountain, feeding the fiery pit at its center. The air was thick with the stench of sulfur and ash, and the only light came from the flickering flames that rose up from the molten lava. "I'm not sure where we are, but we need to get to that mountain. It might give us a better view of our surroundings." When Michael took a step toward the ominous volcanic mountain, Gaia pulled him back by his sleeves, causing him to turn around and face her. Her face was etched with concern as she spoke. I don't think I can use my cultivation here. Something's interrupting my energy flow. Sensing her distress, Michael immediately suggested, try the Olympus. Gaia nodded in agreement and attempted to access her space ring to retrieve some arch-energy crystals. However, to her surprise, she found that she couldn't even access her space ring. It was as if something in this strange realm was preventing her from using her cultivation power and accessing her resources. As Michael watched Gaia struggle to retrieve the arch-energy crystals, he realized that this strange realm had rendered her powerless. In contrast to Gaia, he felt stronger in this strange realm. Despite the system being offline, Michael was able to access the storage and retrieve the necessary weapons for their journey through the strange realm. He handed over a sword sheath, a sword, a quiver full of arrows, and a bow to Gaia, who quickly strapped them to her armor. As Gaia prepared for their journey, Michael retrieved a sparkling arch-energy crystal and handed it to her. Try this, he said, hoping that it would somehow help her use her cultivation energy in this strange realm. Gaia nodded and inserted the crystal into the Olympus on her wrist. The device absorbed the energy from the crystal, but Gaia felt no energy coursing through her veins. Disappointed, she shook her head. It's the same, she said, realizing that something in this realm was preventing her from using her cultivation energy. Without a word, Michael's strong arm encircled Gaia's waist and pulled her close to him. As they took to the air, Gaia felt a strange mix of emotions. She wanted to ask Michael how he was feeling, after learning that Diana was his mother and Noah was his brother. But she couldn't find the words, and Michael's expression was unreadable, cold, and distant. As they soared toward the mountain, the desolation of the realm was all around them. Gaia could feel the weight of despair and darkness pressing down on her. But she was grateful for Michael's presence, which gave her a sense of security and comfort. Finally, they landed atop the mountain, and the sight that greeted them left them both stunned. In the distance, they could see a lone castle rising up from the horizon. Its black walls and twisted spires seemed to mock the very concept of hope. As Gaia stood on top of the mountain and gazed at the horizon, she saw nothing but desolation and darkness. The landscape was barren, devoid of any signs of life, and covered in a thick layer of ash and dust. The air was thick with the stench of sulfur and decay, and the sound of screams and cries echoed through the darkness, creating an eerie and unsettling atmosphere. But her attention was drawn to the lone castle in the distance. It was massive, foreboding, and surrounded by jagged peaks and a moat of boiling lava. The castle was built with black stones, and the gates were adorned with twisted demonic faces, exuding an ominous and malevolent aura. Gaia couldn't help but feel a shiver run down her spine as she gazed upon the castle. She knew that whatever lay within its walls was nothing but pain and torment, a place of eternal darkness and despair. She had never felt such darkness and malevolence before, and the thought of entering the castle sent a chill down her spine. Her heart sank at the sight of the castle. She knew that whatever lay within those walls would be unspeakably evil and dangerous. But with Michael by her side, she felt a sense of determination and courage. Michael typically took a methodical approach when exploring unknown territories, often surveying the area before making a move. However, his anger overpowered his usual caution and he had no patience for strategizing. As a result, he had no intention of lingering on top of the mountain for an extended period of time. Driven by rage and determination, Michael's sole focus was on finding a way out of this accursed realm and exacting revenge on the Great Eight clan and everyone who stood against him. As the Dark Lord, he was determined to show them the extent of his power and what would happen to those who dared to cross him. He was done playing it safe and wanted nothing more than to charge in and take out anyone who dared cross him. As Michael was about to move forward towards the castle, Gaia's grip on his hand brought him to a sudden halt. His eyes remained fixed on the castle in the distance, his mind filled with a burning desire to wreak havoc on those who had caused him and his loved ones so much pain. But Gaia's soft voice brought him back to reality. "Michael, we need to talk," she said with a gentle yet firm tone, hoping to reach him through the thick fog of his anger and pain. Michael didn't turn around. His gaze still locked onto the castle in the distance. But her words managed to penetrate his mind, if only for a moment. Gaia took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she knew would be a difficult conversation. Please, whatever is inside that fucked up looking castle, she pointed towards the ominous castle in the distance, it can wait. We need to take a moment to regroup, to figure out our next move. Gaia's voice was soft and gentle, but it carried a weight of emotion that Michael could feel. He slowly turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the only sound the howling wind that whipped around them. Gaia reached out and gently cupped Michael's face, guiding his gaze toward her. As she looked into his eyes, she could see the pain and anger simmering within him. With a deep breath, she leaned in and touched her forehead to his, hoping to find some way to calm him down. But as soon as their foreheads touched, a wave of grief washed over her. The memory of losing her beloved little lizard, Nightmare, came rushing back, and tears started streaming down her cheeks. She tried to hold back the sobs that threatened to escape her, but the pain was too much to bear. Feeling her body shake with emotion, Michael wrapped his arms around her and held her close, offering comfort in the only way he knew how. Together, they stood on the mountain, holding on to each other as they grieved for what they had lost and braced themselves for what lay ahead. As Michael thought about Diana being his mother, a wave of emotions hit him like a ton of bricks. Anger, sadness, and betrayal all churned inside him, making it difficult for him to think straight. He couldn't believe that the woman who had abandoned him and left him to fend for himself was his own mother. It felt like a cruel joke. He wondered how Diana could have raised Noah, her other son, with all her love and care while he had to struggle and grow up as an orphan. The thought of it made his blood boil, and he couldn't shake off the feeling of being betrayed. But as he stood there, his heart heavy with these emotions, he was also consumed by another pain, the loss of his beloved dragon, Nightmare. The memories of their time together flashed through his mind, and he felt an overwhelming sense of grief and regret. He had never expected to lose Nightmare so soon, and the pain was almost too much to bear. Torn between these two sources of pain, Michael struggled to find a way to move forward. Michael stood there in silence, his eyes focused on the ground. His emotions were all over the place, anger, sadness, and a sense of betrayal. How could she do this to me? He muttered to himself. How could she abandon me like that? Gaia could sense the pain in his voice and leaned in closer to him. I know it hurts, Michael, she said softly, but try to see things from her perspective. Maybe there's more to the story than we know. The Sky Hall has always been capable of manipulating people and situations to their advantage. Maybe there's more to the forbidden spell they cast to send you to Earth when you were born. It's possible that Diana had no choice but to leave you behind. Michael's voice was barely audible as he spoke, but don't you remember what Elidor said? In order for that forbidden spell to work, my mother had to sever her maternal bond with me willingly. It wouldn't have worked otherwise. He paused for a moment, the pain of abandonment still raw and fresh. Despite the pain of losing Nightmare still weighing heavily on her heart, Gaia knew that her duty as Michael's partner was to comfort him and ease his pain. She pushed aside her own grief and focused solely on tending to Michael's needs, for that was what true love meant to her. At that moment, Michael's pain became her top priority, and she was determined to be there for him in any way she could. Even though Gaia loved Michael deeply and wanted to help him heal from the pain of being abandoned by his mother, she also wanted to approach the situation objectively. She didn't want to fuel his anger by blindly supporting his emotions. Gaia knew that there had to be a reason for Diana's actions, and she wanted Michael to consider the possibility that there was more to the story. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was a bigger picture that they were missing. Gaia wanted to understand Diana's perspective and help Michael see things from a different angle. Michael, I know this is difficult for you, but please try to see things from your mother's perspective, she said, her voice filled with empathy. Think about it. The Sky Hall was afraid of the prophecy and the chaos it could bring. Diana had to make a difficult decision, one that no mother should have to make. The Sky Hall, with all its power and influence, would have done anything to prevent that from happening. Even if Diana had wanted to keep you, they would have threatened her family and their safety. So, what would you have done if you were in her position? Would you have risked the lives of your entire family to save one child? Or would you have sacrificed one child to save your family? She paused for a moment to let her words sink in. I'm not saying what she did was right or fair, but sometimes, people are put in impossible situations and have to make tough choices. It doesn't mean they don't love you or care about you. It just means they had to do what they thought was best in a difficult situation. Gaia looked at Michael with compassion, hoping her words would help ease his pain and anger toward his mother. The damage has already been done, Gaia. It's not that easy to forgive and forget, especially when it comes to something as big as this. I don't think I can suddenly accept her as my mother just because she had no choice. It's like a broken mirror that can never be fixed, and even if we did try to fix it, the cracks would always be there, Michael said, his voice laced with pain and bitterness. Chapter 9:40 Hell Walkers. After their discussion about Diana, the conversation gradually shifted to the loss of their beloved dragon, Nightmare. Both of them were struggling to come to terms with his death, and the pain was still raw and intense. Gaia started talking about the times they spent with Nightmare, how he was always there for them, and how he had been more than just a dragon. I miss Nightmare, Michael, she said softly, her voice heavy with sorrow. I can't believe he's gone. I miss him too. It's like a part of me is missing, Michael continued. He was more than just a dragon, Gaia. He was my companion, my friend, my family. Losing him is like losing a part of my soul. Gaia nodded in agreement, her eyes glistening with tears. I keep thinking about all the times we spent with him. The way he would always fly around us, the warmth of his scales under our fingertips. Michael closed his eyes, trying to hold back the tears. I know, Gaia. He was more than just a dragon to us. He was family. They both fell silent, lost in their own thoughts and memories of Nightmare. The pain of his loss was still fresh, and they couldn't come to terms with the fact that he was gone forever. Dragons and Nagas were not known to be fond of each other's kind. They had a long history of hatred and conflicts. However, Gaia and Nightmare's relationship was different. Gaia had known Nightmare since he was a little baby dragon, and over time, they formed a bond that was unbreakable. At first, Gaia didn't take a liking to the dragon, but as time went by, she began to see him in a different light. As a young dragon, Nightmare loved to play, and Gaia found herself in the midst of his antics more often than not. She remembered one particular day when they were having a playful fight in a field. She was in her Nagini form, slithering around while Nightmare was flying around her, playfully trying to catch her tail. But then, Nightmare had a mischievous idea. He flew down low, and with a swift movement, he snatched Gaia's tail in his mouth and started dragging her along the ground. Gaia let out a yelp of surprise but soon realized that Nightmare was just playing with her. Despite their species' inherent hatred towards each other, Gaia and Nightmare formed an unlikely bond. Gaia had known him since he was just a little baby dragon, and over time, they had become close. She remembered how he used to follow her around and how he would always nudge her for attention. Thinking back on that memory brought tears to Gaia's eyes. She had lost a dear friend and companion, which deeply hurt her. As they mourned the loss of their beloved dragon, a gust of cold wind swept through the desolate landscape, causing Michael to tense up. He had a feeling that they were not alone in this dark realm. Michael could sense the hatred and rage emanating from it but couldn't recognize the Hell Walker's identity, hidden beneath its grotesque appearance. The Hell Walker's body convulsed, and its limbs elongated as if trying to escape its own skin. Its eyes locked onto Michael's, and a shiver ran down his spine as he saw a glimpse of recognition in them. Could it be someone he knew before? Michael wasn't sure, but he knew one thing for certain: this Hell Walker was out for revenge, and he was the target. Michael didn't fear the Hell Walker as one might have, but what surprised Michael was the Hell Walker's power. His power seemed to grow with time, and something told Michael the Hell Walker's power depended on his hatred toward him. As Michael looked at the Hell Walker, trying to figure out his identity, the Hell Walker decided to reveal his identity before he died and was sent to the realm of Hell. Peter. Peter Belafort, heir of the Belafort family, he spat out. That was before you brutally murdered me and turned me into this vengeful hell walker. His voice grew even more hostile with each passing moment. Gaia's eyes widened in shock as the identity of the hell walker was revealed. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The name Peter Belafort echoed in her head, and she felt a chill run down her spine. She stood there, frozen in shock, her mind unable to process the truth that had just been revealed. You humiliated me, stripped me of my dignity, and made me a laughingstock. You imprisoned me, and made me a subject of ridicule. But that wasn't enough for you, was it? You killed me in front of my own sister, and now I am cursed to suffer as a vengeful hell walker. Peter's voice was filled with pain, anger, and hatred. He was no longer the person he used to be. He had been transformed into a monstrous abomination fueled by his thirst for revenge against Michael. No trace of humanity was left in him, only a seething rage that threatened to consume him completely. Peter's voice suddenly turned into a peal of maniacal laughter that echoed across the mountain. Gaia shuddered at the sound, feeling the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Peter's laughter soon turned into words dripping with malice. I have dreamed of this moment every day since I arrived in this hellish realm. I have dreamed of the many ways I would torture you, ghost. I will tear you limb from limb, drink your blood, and feast on your flesh. I will make you suffer beyond your wildest imagination. And when I am done, I will repeat everything again. Peter's voice was filled with blood-curdling rage. As he spoke, he described in vivid, gory detail how he would torture Michael, making Gaia's stomach churn with disgust and fear. With an unwavering gaze, Michael delivered a cold and unyielding message to the vengeful hell walker before him. You made the grave mistake of crossing me in life, and now you're paying the price in death. I killed you once, and I can do it again, Michael said with an air of confidence as he readied his sword for another strike. Peter only continued to laugh as he slowly approached Michaela's. Peter stepped toward Michael. He noticed a strange transformation happening to his body. A dim, eerie purple glow emanated from the center of the hell walker's body. Moreover, while Peter stepped closer to Michael, an evil sword materialized in his hand. The sword appeared to be made of black pus and pulsated with an ominous, evil energy. The sword seemed to draw power from the death aura surrounding them, as though it were fueled by the very essence of the realm they were in. Peter swung his black sword toward Michael with immense force, vowing to make him suffer before he moved on to Gaia. But Michael, with his fast reflexes, evaded each swing effortlessly. As the two fought, Peter began to taunt Michael with threats to harm Gaia once he was done with him. I'll make sure she suffers for every wound you've inflicted upon me, Peter growled, his eyes burning with malice. I'll make her scream and beg for mercy. Michael remained calm and focused during the fight, but when he heard Peter threaten Gaia, an uncontrollable rage filled him. His power exploded through the roof as he stopped evading Peter's sword swings and grabbed him by his hands, crushing them with his inhuman strength. The evil sword fell to the ground as Peter screamed in agony. Without mercy, Michael grabbed Peter's head and squeezed it with brute force, causing it to explode into a shower of bloody black mist. The mist fell to the ground, staining the ground with the corrupted remnants of the vengeful hell walker. Unfortunately, Peter's body began to reform, and in moments he was once again standing before Michael. His body was once again covered in dark pus, but he looked stronger than ever. Michael could see the eerie purple glow in the center of Peter's body had grown brighter. Is that all you got? Peter snarled at Michael. His voice filled with malice. The fight continued, with Michael slowly gaining the upper hand once again. But every time he managed to cut off a limb, it quickly grew back, and Peter's laughter only grew more maniacal. You can't win, ghost. I am invincible. Peter taunted. I will torment you for all eternity. Michael's mind was in overdrive as he tried to figure out what it all meant. He knew that the elven rune was powerful, but he had never seen anything like the hell flames before. As he looked at the eerie purple glow emanating from Peter's body, Michael could feel the darkness within him stirring. It was as if the flames and the glow were calling to him, beckoning him to unleash their power. Michael knew that this was his chance to end the fight once and for all. Time to end this. With a newfound determination, Michael leaped backward, creating some distance between him and Peter, and sheathed his sword back into the sheath on his back. As he slowly raised his hand, the dark flames emerged from his palm and danced around his wrist. Gaia felt the intense heat radiating from the dark flames and the pure pitch blackness of the flames. The air around them grew thick and heavy as the flames consumed the darkness, casting an eerie glow that illuminated the entire battlefield. As Michael conjured the dark flames, an intense heat radiated from his palm, causing Gaia to shield her face. The flames danced around his wrist, emitting a pure pitch blackness that seemed to swallow everything in its path. But as the dark flames grew stronger, the eerie purple glow within Peter intensified, pulsating like a beacon of malevolence. A low hissing sound filled the air, making Michael realize that the dark flames and the hell flames had some kind of history that he didn't know about. The dark flames began to move with a life of their own, as if they wanted to break free from Michael's grip and devour the purple glow. The hatred between the two forces grew stronger, and Michael knew that the battle was about to reach its climax. In this realm, where hatred fueled power, the dark flames and hell flames were like two volatile substances that when mixed, threatened to explode with immense power. As the dark flames danced around Michael's wrist and the eerie purple glow in Peter's body grew brighter, both Michael and Peter felt a surge of power coursing through them, making them even stronger than before. The hatred between the flames was palpable, like two caged beasts waiting for a chance to tear each other apart. As the dark flames swirled around his wrist, Michael dashed towards Peter with lightning-fast speed, leaving a trail of afterimages in his wake. Gaia was awestruck as she could barely make out Michael's figure, which moved so fast that it seemed like a blur. Peter, on the other hand, swung his sword violently and erratically, driven only by his boundless hatred. Michael easily evaded all of Peter's attacks, but he could sense that something else was controlling Peter, perhaps the hell flames that animated him. Michael realized that Peter had already lost his sanity when he became a hell walker, but now he had completely transformed into an abomination of hell. With the fight taking a toll on both of them, Michael knew it was time to end it. He gathered all his strength and punched Peter in the gut with such force that his hand penetrated through his back. Peter stumbled backward, but Michael wasn't done yet. He conjured the dark flames, ready to face the hell flames that he knew would emerge from Peter. Just as expected, the purple eerie glow crawled out of Peter's body and took the form of flames. Michael braced himself as he heard a chilling voice emanating from the hell flames, "Welcome to my second home." Although he rarely felt fear, the voice sent shivers down his spine. "The dark flames, I sense your hatred. This is the dominion of the damned, and we rule here. We have long awaited this moment, the moment we can make you suffer and consume your flames," spoke the hell flames cryptically, its twisted glee sending shivers down Michael's spine. The intense and consuming hatred from the hell flames was palpable as they spoke, a hatred that had been festering for centuries. "Your hatred fuels me, just as mine fuels you. It's an endless cycle of agony and despair, a dance between predator and prey. But remember, as much as I need your hatred, I also need you to suffer. And I promise, I will make you suffer like you never have before," said the voice with a twisted satisfaction that sent shivers down the listener's spine. "I have lost count of how many have threatened to end me, yet here I am," Michael sneered, his voice filled with defiance. The hell flames responded with a malicious laugh, and Michael watched as they took control of Peter's body. Suddenly, Peter's eyes began to glow with a purple flame that radiated an eerie light. Michael, in turn, willed the darkness around him and shrouded himself in a cloud of inky blackness. His eyes flickered between a menacing red and black, while the dark flames danced and flickered around his body, fully enveloping him. As the two opposing forces faced off against each other, the tension in the air grew thicker, almost palpable. The hatred that had been festering between them was now fully unleashed, and it was clear that only one of them would emerge victorious. When the two clashed, the sound of metal against metal rang out as they exchanged sword strikes. Michael's movements were precise and calculated, while Peter's were wild and fueled by hatred. Michael easily evaded all of Peter's sword strikes, leaving him open for Michael's attacks. Every time Michael landed a hit, Peter's black pus oozed out from the wound and healed almost instantly. Despite Peter's quick regeneration, Michael remained undeterred. Michael gazed up at the empty sky where the hell flames had ominously laughed before disappearing. He took a deep breath, knowing that while the hell flames were a problem, his first priority was to leave this realm. Turning to face Gaia, he gently brushed her face before focusing his attention on the castle looming in the distance. "We need to get answers, and I think we'll find them in there," Michael said, his voice unwavering. Gaia nodded, still in a state of shock from the intense battle they had just witnessed. As they began to make their way towards the castle, Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. Unbeknownst to Michael, the ruler of Hell and the infamous fallen god who had once made the Pantheon tremble were eagerly awaiting his arrival. As he made his way towards the looming castle in the distance, he had no idea that he was about to cross paths with one of the most feared entities in the universe. The fallen god, whose name was whispered in hushed tones by even the bravest of warriors, was eager to come face to face with Michael, the god of darkness. "Who wants to give your fave author a super gift?" Shamelessly smiling. Before Michael could react, one of the creatures charged at him from behind, its claws ready to strike. The two collided with a deafening explosion, but Michael's half-celestial body was stronger than he had ever imagined. He grabbed the creature's fur and lifted it with ease, his muscles bulging with raw power. Gaia watched in awe as Michael spun around and used the creature as a weapon, smashing it into the other two creatures with devastating force. It was a display of raw strength and skill that left Gaia breathless. As Michael engaged in a fierce battle against the hellish creatures, the ruler of Hell, the infamous fallen god Dagon, sat upon his throne, observing the combat with a feed hovering before him. Dagon's black eyes gleamed with amusement as he watched the god of darkness in action. Despite his amusement, there was a hint of intrigue in Dagon's expression, as if he had stumbled upon something unexpected. He fights with the same ferocity as he did 5,000 years ago, yet there is something different about him now, Dagon mused aloud, his voice smooth as silk. No one could discern whether Dagon harbored any enmity toward the fellow god, as his expression and amused smile remained inscrutable. Only Dagon knew the thoughts churning within his mind. As Dagon watched Michael battling the creatures within his castle, the hell flames materialized around him, taking the shape of a face with no distinguishable features except for two hollow eyes and a gaping mouth. Enough admiring, the hell flames hissed with a voice filled with malice and contempt towards Michael. Dagon merely chuckled, unperturbed by the hostility of the flames. "Of course, my dear friend. You will get what you desire once we have dealt with the Pantheon." The hell flames shifted in agitation, their ghostly form flickering with anger. "And what of the dark flames and its twin? I want them both obliterated, their existence erased from this universe." Dagon's expression remained unreadable, his amused smile still present. "Do not worry, my dear friend. I have not forgotten our bargain. Once the Pantheon has been dealt with, the dark flames and its twin shall meet their end." The hell flames seethed with anticipation, eager for the destruction of their ancient enemy. "I will hold you to your word, Dagon." Dagon merely waved a dismissive hand. "Of course, my friend. You have nothing to worry about." The hell flames flickered one last time in the feed, sending a malevolent gaze toward Michael before vanishing into Dagon's body. It was no secret that the hell flames were the most unstable and vicious of all primordial flames, with a penchant for consuming hatred as fuel. Its choice of Dagon as a host was not surprising, for the fallen god harbored an endless amount of hatred toward the Pantheon. Together, they made a formidable pair with their own twisted agendas, united in their desire to bring destruction to everything the Pantheon had created. Suddenly, 3 massive meteors, each one ablaze with a crimson-red flame, appeared in the sky above. They hung there for a moment, suspended in time, before hurtling down toward the horde of hell walkers below. The ground shook as the meteors struck the earth, creating massive craters that swallowed up the hell walkers. The force of the impact sent shockwaves rippling through the air, shattering nearby structures and kicking up clouds of dust and debris. The sound was deafening, a roar that drowned out all other noise. After discovering the truth about his family, Michael's emotions had been a maelstrom of anger, betrayal, and grief. However, he had used this storm of emotions to fuel his power, and he had truly embraced the darkness within him. This allowed his power to grow beyond any limits he had previously known. With each passing moment, Michael felt his power surge through him like an unstoppable force. The darkness within him had become a part of him, and he had learned to wield it like a weapon. As the smoke cleared, Michael descended from the sky and surveyed the destruction he had wrought. The horde of hell walkers lay decimated, reduced to nothing but ash and rubble. The air was thick with the smell of burnt flesh and sulfur, and the ground was scorched black from the heat of the impact. Gaia stared in awe at the sight before her, barely able to comprehend the sheer power that Michael had just unleashed. For a moment, she felt a flicker of fear, wondering if Michael's power was too great for him to control. But then she saw the determination in his eyes, the way his jaw was set, and she knew that he was in control. He had unleashed his true power and brought destruction to their enemies, and there was no stopping him now. When the dust settled from the impact of the meteors, the battlefield was unrecognizable. The ground was scorched and cracked, and the air was thick with smoke and the stench of burnt flesh. The bodies of the hell walkers were charred and twisted, their once formidable figures reduced to nothing but ash and bone. In the midst of this destruction stood Michael, the god of darkness. His body was wreathed in black flames, and his eyes glowed with an unearthly light. The power he had unleashed upon the battlefield was beyond comprehension, and it was clear that he had truly embraced the darkness within him. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.